economy around. And we've trained in excess of 4,000 bricklayers throughout the country. And the reason we do that, firstly, is because we are a South African organization and we are local, and we want to see and demonstrate that it's that part that is going to make a difference in terms of delivery. But on the other hand, we're doing this because we want to create that hope. Every single individual that we engage with, we are creating that hope in the future of this country. We have a very special focus on decarbonization as a business. And we look at this, it's not a new technology, it's been applied everywhere else in the world. We talk about the AFRs. We're doing tire burning in our factory in the Western Cape. That is just to look at the alternative fuels in terms of how we can improve ourselves. We look at waste. There's a model, and DELON is going to elaborate on that, where we look at those guys that go through the streets and pick up rubbish in our bins every week. And I always look at that and say, what an opportunity. Because when they start sorting that waste, some of that waste is actually gold in terms of decarbonization or looking at alternative fuels. And we can embrace that and create an industry and create employment. And the cement industry has got a part to play. Solar and wind, that's the gift Africa has got that no one else in the world has got, where we can actually use alternative power. And thanks to Eskom, we started embracing that and using it a lot more. So basically what I'm trying to say is infrastructure is a catalyst for growth. And it's an opportunity that always remains with us. So in my last slide, I wanted to share this case study and a demonstration of the power of private-public partnership. So we had COVID, and the biggest problem with COVID, or one of the problems, was the classroom overcrowding because of the requirement for social distancing. And when that came up, Rwanda decided we're going to build 22,000 classrooms to accommodate this problem of overcrowding in the classrooms. And they did it in 8 months. On the other hand, South Africa decided we've got a problem with overcrowding, so the kids are going to stay at home for 8 months. It's a different approach. But what makes that difference? And I couldn't find anything other than leadership. And it's not just leadership from the government side, it's also leadership from business, because business has got a big role to play. ASHRAF mentioned that, with all this, if we don't talk, we're not gonna get anywhere. But if we start talking, we need to talk with action, and that action is not gonna come only from government. It's leadership both in the social, in the communities, in the private sector, and the government. The legacy of this generation will be judged on the leadership bestowed in the most critical of times. Our response as a business is to empower people to experience a better quality of life. I've got my colleagues that will be elaborating on what I've shared with you, but I want to leave you with this one reality. The GDP of South Africa is 420 billion. Even though we've got 60 million people, it averages $7,000 per capita. And Rwanda is 11 billion with 13.2 million people, which is around $850 per capita. Zim, 26 billion. It's actually twice the that of Rwanda, but they also have 1,700 per capita. But there is one difference: leadership. And every single one of us needs to be asking one simple question. And ASHRAF has put a challenge on all of us. What is our purpose in regards to all of this? I thank you.
Okay, thank you. You need to come up here, actually. We're going to chat. Thank you. Thanks for that. You've certainly got us thinking about a lot of things, right? Yeah, probably that's fine there. Okay, well, you've certainly amplified the issue of purpose. Let's start with, you've mentioned Rwanda like 3 times.
Yes.
In the conversation. So let's start with it. I mean, besides giving it as a one-liner, like, seriously, what is the difference between Rwanda, that was decimated in the same month that democratic South Africa was born, right? Literally in April 1994. What's the difference between what they're doing now and what we're doing now?
I think the one word to define the difference is implementation. I think from a point of leadership, when you look at the way in which they approach this whole issue of COVID, the first thing they did was to call industry. As a producer in Rwanda, they told us, listen, we've got a project, and at the moment we need to build these schools, and it's not gonna take a year because we need to accommodate the kids. They brought in the government structures, the army was involved, and everybody understood and knew what is the purpose, and they worked towards that purpose, and 8 months later they delivered 22,000.
I mean, does it speak, and obviously from where PPC fits in, you have exposure to the entire continent, so you know how different countries work, right? Does it speak to, and I have to choose my words carefully, the bottleneck created by ruling by consensus in a democracy? And if I'm choosing my words very, very carefully, versus Rwanda, in spite of the praise, there are suggestions that what the president says goes, that's it. And we can't really do that in this country.
Yeah, at the risk of being misinterpreted, I think sometimes benevolent dictatorship is probably the way to go when there is a crisis. It's like when the house is on fire, you don't actually sit down and have a conversation about how do we get out of the house. You shout and you call and you scream. And I think that's what South Africa requires at the moment. We need to do the consultations, but actually the problem is there, it's identified. I think what we require is action, and not just action from government, but action from leaders in the business. We just need to put some action.
So the example you gave of COVID-19 and the classrooms, I think, is profound in terms of what Rwanda did and what South Africa did. And yes, I mean, not to be quoted, you're not calling for a dictator, not at all, I hear that. But, you know, is South Africa a house on fire? And I'll link that to your point about leadership, which is one of the points you brought up. That means, if the answer is yes, then whereas we, for democracy, we need to be engaging in a series of quick, decisive actions because a house or houses are on fire.
You just need to look at delivery. Yesterday I was out in Northwest in Klerksdorp. There is so many projects that needs to go into that particular area, and one of the reasons why it's not going through is this whole aspect of construction mafia, because somebody has decided this project will not happen, irrespective of the social need, irrespective of the legal framework that operates in that area. Now, this is the time where you put the gauntlet and say, let's get the order right and get the job done.
So, you know, earlier on we spoke about having a front table with 60 million people, and I believe that. but I also am practical about the fact that sometimes we have to start with smaller tables, right? PPC Africa is in a unique position of privilege, right? So for all the problems you've mentioned above, right, what can you do as PPC Africa to instigate radical, dramatic change in the areas of influence that you have?
I think when we share examples of where things are working, we get people going. And we get those conversations around what else can we do differently in that small little place that we are in. We're currently doing a lot of technical training with regards to the communities in which we operate. And the whole idea is to get people empowered, and once you empower them, they are able to basically get things done for themselves. And the whole idea is that the little that you do in that small corner, we can all go back and complain about what is happening in the country, but complaining and no action will not make a difference. We've told ourselves that the input that we can have in the industry is to take the leadership and basically identify the challenges with solutions like skills training that we are doing to ensure that we have an industry that is ready.
Okay, so, forgive my naivety, you mentioned the construction mafia. So who's the construction mafia?
I think it starts off as a situation where we need to look and say, how do we do this whole social distribution and ensuring that people are empowered? And there was this whole talk about the 30%, which got misinterpreted. So the intentions was correct to say, if you're going to a Limpopo and you're going to put up a structure, you can't import all the resources, and the jobs needs to be permeating to the society within that area. But truth be told, there is a lot of corruption around that, and that's what construction mafias is. I mean, I made an example. As I was growing up, I was called a terrorist, but it was a misinterpretation of what we actually need to do right. And there was a grouping of people that had a wrong intention, but it doesn't mean that I was. So it is real, it is there. What we need to be addressing is the issue of empowering communities in those projects that we do. However, we should not allow the criminal element.
So the construction mafia is the real terrorist.
It is the real terrorist.
But okay, seriously, how do we dismantle that? I mean, we know we have the government, we have judiciary, I understand all of that, right? But it's still not done. And we can talk about state capture. I heard Justice Zondo 2 days ago. But what do we really do?
I think companies themselves needs to be honest about transformation and needs to be serious about it. As a business, we said transformation for us, it's not about the legislation. It's about a real change. And when you do things honestly in terms of effecting real change, we can avoid some of those. Okay.
You spoke about alternative fuels, right? Yes, it's a big issue, the greening of, the whole issue about this unhealthy world that we're living in, right? What's your take in terms of what can be done, what is being done in say, South Africa and Africa in particular?
We should change our mindset around alternatives. Alternatives, when you look at plastic bottles in the street, you can see debt or you can see an opportunity because of the heat value. But it starts by introducing an understanding of what is the capacity that we can get out of that. So we don't look at waste as just waste. We look at the value that comes out of that particular waste.
But how do we affect that change and the mindset change? I mean, who does it? Is it government? Is it schools? Is it communities? And I don't mean just for a day, like an absolute understanding. So for example, to make a rather silly comment, if if we have load shedding, which we have, and we're bound to have it just now, right? We make arrangements to circumvent that, whichever form. But for many of us here today, like the biggest issue right now is like, do we have Wi-Fi? So it's like paramount, it's an imperative. Like, look, I can be here for the morning, but do you have Wi-Fi? I need my office to connect with me. So we understand the urgency. We don't have that urgency when it regards to, things like plastic and other things, do we?
Yes, I think it's an issue of education. When we got to DRC, Kinshasa it's actually a very, it looked very dirty. And we got with that mindset to say, what can we do with this kind of waste? And unfortunately, in South Africa, if you were to do that, they will tell you you're abusing people. But we actually said, can we collect these plastic bottles and have a depot somewhere? Firstly, we created jobs in terms of those that were collecting the plastic and getting it into one place. Secondly, we actually cleaned up the city, because now we're removing the waste out of the streets. But we actually had to explain the purpose of why do we do that. And I think you're correct. We need to be starting at the point where we go to schools, make them understand what is the benefit of that particular waste.
I mean, is it a case of, because I'm looking at the example of the Japanese at the World Cup. Did you guys see that, the Japanese at the World Cup cleaning the stadiums? You must have seen that, right? I mean, it's just remarkable, but it wasn't a one-off. They're doing it all the time, right? So that's fantastic, but is it a case of like, because we've been talking about it, why can't we do it? Is it a case of it's okay to do that when you're middle class and you're wealthy, because there's comfort already and the average person in South Africa is not us, right? Those who are completely poverty-stricken, destitute, no hope, and no hope of hope, right? It's the furthest thing from their mind. It doesn't mean they're right about littering, because we all litter, but asking them to clean up the environment, they're like, I want food.
But you look at what you mentioned about the Japanese. They actually, when they were asked, why do you do this? They say, it's the way of life. That's how we were taught. Mm-hmm. And I think we need to start there to say, how do we teach those lessons in terms of getting the value? One of the things, there was a mention about RDP housing. I'll give you an example. We tend to assume that people actually want free housing, a gift. And it's a mindset that we have created. Now we've got a nation that grows up thinking, one day when I'm 21 or 22, I will qualify for a free house. But you go and look at the real need in rural areas, in that people actually start off and they put up a small structure. They don't have an RDP, and the kind of housing that they create is actually better than the kind of RDP. However, you go to the RDP, so-called RDP houses, and you put up an RDP and come back 5 years later and look at that space and see how much of a transformation happens in that area. Because once you've given that kickstart, people have got the means and abilities to actually expand on it. So RDP, the misconception is that when we started off, we said it's for free, you can have it for free. And when you start planting that kind of seed, people basically respond to it. And I think we should be changing the way we go about things and say it's an affordable housing, we're giving you that start, and you will be able to do
that's a good point, yeah. Let me wrap up by picking up what you said early on. You said the unemployment rate, according to the latest sources now, is like 40%. I mean, that is frightening. I mean, to put that into perspective in this room, right, it means, I don't know, what are we, 40 people in the room, 50 people? It means like, say we're 50, it means like we got like 20 people who are actually without a job. I mean, 20 people seated here today are without a job, and we think it's okay that things will just, it's okay, you know what, you're without a job, but go and support Chiefs and Pirates, you'll be okay, you're without a job, watch rugby, you're without a job, just chill with your friend. It cannot be sustainable, never, right? So, therefore, my question to you, now, PPC Africa, how many people do you employ?
about 1,800.
Okay, so I met the guys from YES, Youth Employment Service. I met Ravi just, by the way, shopping on Saturday, and we're talking about jobs, and he's talking about they hire, they find jobs for skilled people. But I'm saying beyond that, right? What can you do as PPC Africa to be completely radical?
Yeah. So your question earlier, in South Africa we employ 1,800. Throughout their entire business, about 3,000 people.
Okay, fine, yeah.
I just want to touch on one thing. We talk about unemployment, and again, it's the mindset that we put into people's mind. When we talk unemployment, we're talking people reporting to an office or to a site on a specific day. I think Africa is gifted with entrepreneurs. We should be looking at it as, do you earn an income? And if you were to go and revisit those numbers, they're probably lower in terms of not getting an income, because we can create those opportunities. And I think what we should be looking at is not to employ people, but to make people earn an income. It's a very different
to engage in partnerships in their own space. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Provide those opportunities. And having said that, our approach in areas that we live in, when we look at skills development, it is to give. We say as a business we exist to empower people to experience a better quality of life. So we're not looking more around how much employment we can create. We're looking at how much of income earners we can create. What sort of possibilities can we give to make these people able to create some sort of income?
Absolutely.
More that than creating jobs.
And from now on, anybody wants a job, I'm going to say, can't give you a job. Here's the number for PPC Africa. They'll go into business with you in some form of partnership. Let's hope that happens. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Here we are.
Can I sit down?
Yeah, you can get up there. So thank you for that. We'll have a chance. You'll have a chance to ask questions to NJOMBO later on, right? When you get to the end of the program. Thank you for that and for sharing those all important insights, I would think. And again, I noticed when I asked earlier on about posting on social media. Well, I started with Twitter to say we are here. In fact, many of you did so. So that's fantastic. Please do that, right? But also, beyond just putting the cute pictures that you've done, and that's fine, quote what we just heard. Feel free to quote the speakers and then quote your own opinions and use those same hashtags that we've got, that are up on the screen there, because it'll be very good as a way of indexing what you think, and I think that's really, really important. Okay, let's move on then to the second of the speakers, Professor NWULU. I asked Prof. Namdi, why is it called Prof. N? And he said, well, most people have a battle pronunciation. You see, that seems to be like the whole theme today. I don't know why. Hopefully we got that right too. Thank you. Director, Food, Energy and Water and Systems. And we look forward to your conversation, right? What you haven't done is given us your purpose. So I need to indulge you. Quick one-liner. What is your personal purpose?
To combat insecurity in food, energy and water systems. South Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa grapples with insecurity of these resources. And I think it's high time we're serious about tackling these problems and then creating employment and food security for our people.
Absolutely, I completely agree. And what do you think South Africa's national purpose ought to be?
Combating unemployment. The numbers we heard.
As we've just said,
yeah.
Well, there we are. Look forward to hearing your presentation. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us, both physically and those that are joining virtually. Right. My name is NWULU. I will be speaking this morning on what I've titled Concretizing Decarbonization in the Cement Industry. So we know there are efforts at decarbonizing certain elements of the cement industry or in the cement industry, and we want to concretize it, look at avenues, how we can foster it and accelerate the pace, right? I have 20 minutes to do this, right, which is difficult for an academic because typically a lecture, typically in 15 minutes, you have to just introduce the topic. So I have to summarize everything in 20 minutes, and I trust that I've set my timer, so I should be good. And Prof. Clinton told me that I must stick to time. Okay, this is the outline of my presentation. I would basically go through an overview of the cement industry currently, and then we would highlight decarbonization actions in the cement industry. This essentially is not necessarily new to most people. We're quite conversant with some of the activities in this space. And then I would now pivot next to concretizing decarbonization in the cement industry. Can 4IR technologies play a role? And essentially what I'll do there is to unpack what avenues where we can leverage 4IR technologies in that space, and then I will conclude. By way of introduction, I wouldn't go through this slide chapter and verse because of time, but essentially we know that cement is of immense importance. It's been of immense importance throughout the ages. It's currently still being used now, right? And it's stated here that it's also the second most consumed product globally after potable water, so proving its significance, right? And then even though it's significant, it's one of the core contributors to global CO2 emissions, right? The chemical reactions and the high temperatures that are required for the production of cement, right, it contributes to emissions significantly, and therefore it remains one of our targets, right, in a bid to combat carbon footprints, right? And therefore it is referred to as one of the hard-to-abate sectors, meaning emissions typically is not very straightforward often to curtail emissions in the cement industry, like the steel industry, for instance, right? Where solutions exist, they are often quite pricey, right? And then again, there has been an increasing demand for cement, right? There was a dip during the COVID-19 pandemic, but now it's increased, right? In the same vein, within the past couple of years, there's also been increasing CO2 emissions, right? From 2018 to 2020, it was about 0.58 tons of CO2 per ton of cement produced, right? In 2021, it increased marginally to 0.59. Right, and then the jury is still out to what it will be this year. However, in light of the goal of achieving net zero emissions by 2050, the time frame of those targets suggests that by 2030, right, our cement emissions in tons per CO2 of tons of cement produced should fall to 0.30 tons of CO2 per cement produced. So now it means now that in the next 8 years, there should be significant, right, efforts to curtail the quantum of cement emissions produced from cement. So now that is actually a significantly tall order, right? And then essentially, the point I'm just trying to make from this slide is that it's a difficult task. We have to reduce the quantum of CO2 produced from the cement industry, and simultaneously we have to increase the quantum of cement that is available because demand is increasing. So demand is increasing, we have to satisfy that demand. At the same time, we have to reduce the quantum of emissions. Facets of the cement industry. There are 4 key stages of the cement industry: material preparation, raw materials and fuel grinding, clinker making, and finish grinding. I wouldn't go through all of that, but essentially, in this process, there are 3 flows that are of interest to us. The first one is the material flow, the flow of the produce from the raw material up onto the finished product. And as that material flows, simultaneously there's the energy flow. So there is the material flow, there is the energy flow, and correspondingly there's also an emissions flow, right? So the material flows, emissions correspondingly flow, after the energy. So what we're seeking to do is, can we have the material flowing, and can we also have some quantum of energy flowing, but without the commensurate emissions also flowing through the system, right? And then in this image on the right, typically breaks down the cement industry into two, basically the supply side and the demand side. So often there's a lot of focus on the supply side. There's also a demand side to the cement industry, and as I will show later, decarbonization efforts should exploit strategies both at the supply end and at the demand spectrum of the cement industry. So I would, based on that categorization, the supply side and the demand side, I would delve very quickly into decarbonization actions in both spheres, right? Decarbonization actions in the supply side, and then of course also at the demand side. These actions are well detailed in IEA's 2018 report, right? And it basically categorizes efficiencies at the supply side into four, right? There is the drive to improve energy efficiency, which consists of optimizing the process control, right? Optimizing it, enhancing the machinery and every other thing at that space for the process. And then there's also the aspect of energy efficient grinding and cooling, right? The process, which is one of the key aspects of cement production, how to ensure now that that process actually is improved. Now, this also involves either retrofitting existing facilities or building energy efficient ones from the get-go. And then there's also the aspect of energy efficient kilns, which speaks to the thermal energy efficiency aspect in the cement production process, right? And then there's also the drive to switch to alternative fuels. Basically, alternative fuels are fuels that are less carbon intensive than conventional fuels, right? And then I think the CEO had alluded to certain alternative fuels that PPC is already leveraging in their operations. He mentioned biomass, he mentioned waste, both biogenic and then non-biogenic waste sources, right? Which are wastes that hitherto should have been sent to the landfill site. He mentioned plastic bottles, but you're harnessing it and then you're using it to as alternative fuels in the cement production process, right? And then there are other various fuels that are being used to certain degrees of success based, of course, on locational attributes, right? Where that is in supply, then it's leveraged there. And then the third key decarbonization aspect speaks to reducing the clinker to cement ratio, right? There's a lot of research, and I know even at in the University of Johannesburg, there's a lot of research in this space, right? How to leverage material testing of blended cements and the rest, the use of instruments like fly ash, right? ESCOM currently produces about 31.5 million tons of fly ash, right? And then it's supposed to be of good quality, and we know that it will still be available till about 2050, when the net zero emission target should kick in. So it means now that there is that substantial supply of fly ash, and there are other, there's also a lot of research going on in this space in a bid to introduce material efficiency in the cement production process. And then finally, there's also the use of innovative technologies, very pricey or very expensive technologies, carbon capture and storage, carbon capture and utilization, right? Basically, there's a difference between both, but for storage, you're basically storing it into geological crevices to be used later. Utilization, you're basically deploying it in areas where it is needed. However, it's a relatively expensive technology, and then the uptake of the technology is assumed to increase as the years go by. I wouldn't delve too much into these. There are other things I could have talked about, but I want to talk about how 4IR can be used to concretize some of the actions that are currently going on here. In the supply side, in the demand side rather, there are certain strategies and actions that can be deployed. Right? There's the aspect of material efficient design that is at the end user aspect, right? At the final part where the architects, the building managers design buildings. How do you ensure now that you get your structures, but the demand on cement used is reduced, right? And that's ensuring now that there's efficient design of your building, right? And then there's also end-of-life options. That is when certain buildings have come to their end of life. How do you ensure now that, if possible, they can either be extended or they can be used for other purposes? And we are aware of the, I think it's the Komati Power Station, where it's been shut down, but they're using it for, they're retrofitting it in light of the just energy transition, where it can also be used to also generate renewable energy. And then there's more intensive use and construction waste reduction. I need to add, though, that these demand-side strategies, they are often in tandem. They go hand in hand. So, for instance, should you adopt one of the strategies, it perhaps impacts the other strategy negatively. So, for instance, if you extend the lifetime extension of a building, should you extend its lifetime, then you're, of course, reducing the options for the end of life, right? Because you have, at the end of life of that extended building or extended facility, you might struggle to see end of life. You might struggle to see materials that can be useful for component reuse, for downcycling or waste stockpiling, right? But what is a challenge at the demand side, and I think I saw a comment by PPs on it, is that there seems to be a lack of consumer willingness. There seems to be a lack of willingness on the part of the end users, right, to pay for green cement, because obviously completely decarbonized cement will come at a premium, will come at a price, and there might be reluctance, right, in paying that premium. And I would talk about how we can perhaps increase the appetite of consumers to pay for greener cement. So that brings me to what I feel is a useful tool in concretizing decarbonization in the cement industry. Right, so the previous slides I talked about, especially at the supply side, various technologies that can be used. But now I want to answer the question, can 4IR technologies play a role in concretizing decarbonization in the cement industry? And what is 4IR? 4IR is the fourth industrial revolution. What is an industrial revolution? An industrial revolution is when there are significant changes in society as we know it, inspired by technological innovations. So we are currently at the cusp of the fourth. There have been three. We are now at on the advent of the fourth. And the fourth industrial revolution, the Dean Marshall mentioned it, but he didn't delve too much into it, but is characterized by what is called cyber-physical systems, right? That is, a cyber-physical system is a physical system that is often interacting and controlled by cyber tools, right? And so the decarbonization technologies I showed at the supply side often relies to a large extent on physical technologies. So now, can we enhance the impact of those technologies leveraging on cyber tools? And that's the question I would like to answer. So I would only work with two specific cyber technologies of the fourth industrial revolution. The first is prescriptive analytics, right? And then the second is blockchain technology, right? Prescriptive analytics is a subset of the analytics space, basically leveraging data to make informed decisions and enhance business intelligence. So there are there are 4 kinds of analytics. You have the diagnostic analytics, which seeks to answer the question, what happened, right? Descriptive analytics seeks to answer the question, what is currently happening. Predictive analytics seeks to answer the question, what is going to happen in the future. Then prescriptive analytics, which is where I'm zeroing in on, seeks to answer the question, what is the best thing, what is the most optimal course of action that should happen. And there are a host of technologies or skills or frameworks that can be used to leverage prescriptive analytics. And then the second technology that would happen is blockchain technology. And then prescriptive analytics, a very quick dive into it. I mentioned that I'm struggling for time, but basically prescriptive analytics seeks to find out the most optimal course of action considering various operating conditions, various perspectives, right? And then you have some known parameters, you have unknown parameters, and then you basically feed it into an optimization solver, and then you get an optimal decision, and you should now get a corresponding action, right? And then it's also useful for scenario analysis, for scenario modeling, and the rest, basically to see various case studies, various factors that should influence our decision. So in the context of the cement industry, right, I have detailed a couple of the technologies that are available to reduce the carbon footprint in the cement space. Then how do we use prescriptive analytics in this space? Right, so I adapted a model that I have, that I'd been working on when Prof. Clinton told me that I was to speak here. And basically, in this system, you have 4 objectives, right? Your objectives are there to either minimize an objective or you want to maximize it. So in terms of cost, you would actually want to minimize your capital cost, you want to minimize your R&M cost, you want to minimize your fuel cost. And then in terms of revenue from produce, the revenue obtained from the quantum of cement produced, you want to maximize that in that case. And then you have to leverage on the data that you have. In this case, you have the cement data, the fuel and electricity price, and various operating data that you would require to make a useful business decision. And then basically, at the end of your model, you have your technology selection model, which is basically your optimization solver, right? And then it calculates the quantum of emissions from the various options of technologies. It calculates the cost, and it comes up with an optimal, mathematically robust solution that determines or details the technology of choice. So it can be a strategic or a decision support tool, right, to make informed decisions for investments, for instance, in various technologies, such that you're able to minimize your costs, your operational cost, your capital cost, and then you're able to maximize your benefits. And then you also come, of course, the various constraints that are in operation, operational constraints and the long-term strategic constraints. You also have to respect those constraints. Essentially, what this framework does is that it tells you, in light of various candidate technologies that can be leveraged for decarbonization, right, what actions need to be taken, what specific actions need to be taken amongst those choices, on what scale do you leverage those technologies or actions, right, and when do you do it? So you can also do this analysis in a dynamic way that is not going to be static over a period of years, right, and then it gives you that at the end, with the end goal of decarbonizing the complete cement and concrete cycle. Right. And then blockchain is another technology that I would detail on quickly. Blockchain basically is a form of distributed ledger technology, and it basically helps to keep records, essentially. It helps to keep records in a transparent manner. So I often tell my students that three key, DTI, the acronym DTI, I use it to refer to blockchain decentralization, transparency, and immutability. Decentralization, it's not stored in a central place, so all the nodes have access to the data. It prevents manipulation of the data. Transparency, everybody can see what's there. And immutability suggests that you cannot tamper with the data. Even if you make a mistake writing to the blockchain, you have to write the correct one. You cannot delete the hitherto transmitted data. Right? So blockchain in the cement industry, I would just bandy an idea, right? Basically, perhaps it's worth exploring leveraging blockchain and market mechanisms to unlock investments in carbon reduction, right? Why is it necessary? Because the sheer cost involved in reducing emissions from cement factories is a concern, right? And then there's often tax credits, but it's not often enough to justify the significant quantum of investment in this space. So there should be a platform, a voluntary market mechanism that can allow the end users at the demand side to purchase totally decarbonized products if they are available, right? So the assumptions highlighted is that those products are available, then consumers are willing to pay a premium for those products, and that there is a mechanism to verify that those products are actually green, and then the quantum of carbon footprint that they actually reduce, right? So blockchain technology, due to the factors I mentioned before, is decentralized nature, transparency, and immutability, can provide a platform that each ton of CO2 that is actually reduced is properly accounted for, right? And then there should be a pilot that should gauge the market adoption, right? And then, of course, initial pilot study problems, like the number of customers who will be willing to pay a premium, how much is a fair price that they would pay, right? And then basically seeing the mechanics around operationalizing such a platform. So, for instance, you could have a cement company that would produce, for an example, 1 million tons of green cement a year, and then you bank the carbon credits that accrue from the production of that green cement, right? And we could come up with a mechanism such that, irrespective of where that cement is produced, right, a customer can buy from that bank, can buy some green credits from that bank, right? And because blockchain enables fractional purchases, you don't need to, you can buy, if maybe you want to buy 100 rands worth of green credits, and that's what the customer is willing to pay, then blockchain provides a platform that you buy that credit, the green credit, and it's deducted from the bank that was created by the credits that accrue by the green cement. So there are a lot of mechanisms that I feel that can be explored by the cement industry to leverage that, to leverage the desire of folks to buy green cement products. The key issue is if those consumers are willing, and at what price that they are willing to be able to pay a premium for a green product. But it's just it's an idea, and I think it is also worth exploring. So if there is sufficient uptake over a period of time, then ideally the cement manufacturing company can justify investing in either a carbon capture and storage plant or any other high capital intensive plant, because there is the opportunity to recoup the investment later on, and also to advance sustainability. So this is a framework for a diagrammatic representation of the blockchain-enabled carbon footprinting process. It has a smart contract that automates all of the data. So you have, in conjunction with IoT, for instance, then you get the CO2 data that comes from direct burning of combustion of fossil fuels. if that still happens, then you get the quantum of emissions, and then you also get indirect emissions, which comes from the electricity supply, if that's also used, and then you compute two of them, and then you're able to put on the blockchain the details of the carbon credits, right, and the quantum of carbon that has been saved. And then this provides a platform for environmental agencies to assess the carbon footprint report, and then it can also feed into the carbon market in a decentralized and transparent manner. This differs from the conventional way where calculating carbon credits is typically a manual process, and there are a lot of players involved in that space, and there's a lot of vagueness, right, in calculating that. So blockchain would introduce transparency and then significantly enhance the uptake of the carbon marketplace. So my final thoughts, complying with the climate targets to a large extent depend, or complying on internationally agreed climate targets would be dependent on hard to abate sectors like the cement industry, amongst other industries, because these industries are very important and they emit significant carbon footprint to the atmosphere. No single technology can deliver the emissions that is required for reaching net zero emissions. There is need to leverage on a wide range of technologies, right, specifically tailored to the cement industry, and also factoring in locational attributes like the country or the region, right, and then tailoring those solutions for that specific locale, right. Technologies that contribute to achieving net zero emissions are known, but in some cases are not commercially viable. Hence, there is need to pursue further innovation, further market research, further pilot studies in a bid to increase the penetration of these technologies. And prescriptive analytics can help in this regard in determining the optimal choice, the best case business and technology, best case scenario in leveraging these technologies. And then blockchain and voluntary market mechanisms can also help in increasing uptake of decarbonized products. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks for that, Professor NWULU. You see, you're the classic example of, under promise, over deliver. We said 20 minutes, you agreed, you made it 30. So there, over delivery, nothing wrong with that. Thank you, fascinating. Let's have a quick chat.
Thank you.
Most interesting indeed. Thank you. Let's start with your topic around decarbonization, right? We just had the COP27 now, right?
Yes.
Ending in Egypt. And there's been like a pushback from different parties about whether one should adhere to it or like the whole COVID-19, whether it even exists type of thing. Like,
yes.
This is just nonsense, trying to strip Africa of its value, because I think other countries like Germany had to go back to coal because of the problems they've had there. But what's your take on that?
I think that Africa should have a nuanced view and approach to decarbonization, right? Africa is still plagued by a lot of developmental challenges, right? Africa, in so many areas, is yet to industrialize properly, and to drive industrialization, one of the core requirements is reliable power and cheap power, right? And it does seem as if, to critics now, it seems as if the West has gone along, they have industrialized, and now they are preaching the gospel that Africa should go green, right? However, Africa is still bears the brunt of climate change and some of the effects of fossil fuels being emitted into the atmosphere. So my take is that Africa should pursue an energy transition, should pursue carbonization, but that's where prescriptive analytics comes in, do so in an optimal manner that doesn't compromise the ability to industrialize, right, to build factories, to get people out of unemployment, and at the same time it should have sustainable targets to cutting down its emissions in the medium to long term.
Yeah. And does Africa speak with one voice?
Africa does not speak with one voice on so many issues. Decarbonization, for instance, on a single market or a single currency. So, it might be difficult to get one voice, right? But I must say, though, that on the aspect of Africa slowing down its the just energy transition and approaching decarbonization in a more nuanced way, there does seem to be some consensus, right, that Africa needs to maybe Africa should not be as aggressive as the developed world perhaps wants it to be.
But I mean, should Africa then speak with one voice?
Yes,
what I'm saying,
certainly Africa should speak with one voice, certainly.
Because I mean, Europe doesn't speak with one voice, does it? They claim so. I'm talking of like European Union.
Yeah.
But the reality is, when there's needs, whatever the needs are, then I gave the example of Germany. They break rank, isn't it?
Yeah. So I mean, when with the conflict in Ukraine and Russia and the disruption in the oil supply, right? You saw a good number of countries that wanted to fall back to reopening their coal power plants, and that, of course, was a decision that nobody can query, right? Because it was in their best interest. In the same vein, my point is that Africa, it's in her best interest to pursue the energy transition, decarbonization, but at the same time should do so in a more it should speak with one voice and do so in a more controlled way, setting reasonable targets and advancing its industrialization.
And what would that be? The reasonable targets, but still advancing industrialization and protecting the earth. Yeah.
Also, for instance, I would countries that have coal deposits, for instance, there's a lot of research about how to get clean coal. For instance, those research should not be ignored, right? That research or those schemes should also be continued. If there are resources that are available that are not necessarily renewable in certain African regions, and the technology is established and is available and the skill set is there, then Africa should, of course, leverage on those technologies, should leverage on those skill sets and get power and produce raw materials, produce cement if need be. However, we must be cognizant of that should not last forever. So there should be timelines about how to wean ourselves of those sources in the long run, and at the same time increase our decarbonization, increase our industrialization. So we must set targets that we should use these, for want of a better word, dirty energy sources for this long, and during that time frame, we must also build capacity to also go green.
And you say we must do that?
We must, yeah, because we have some of these. Africa does not lack lots of policy documents. Yeah, there are lots of policy documents, but more often than not, the challenge is in the implementation, right? So, for instance, in the issues of oil spilling, right, across various regions in Africa, there have been targets where it says, okay, in 2000, for instance, in the year 2000, oil spill should be a thing of the past, and then it doesn't happen because the targets are set, right, and giving us a time frame to still continue with actions that are not necessarily environmentally friendly. And then you now take the corresponding action, build the corresponding capacity. But often Africa doesn't do the needful, so you just have those targets, and then the years roll by, and the targets are not achieved.
Now, you spoke about 4IR as a solution, as a vehicle, really, to the climate change problems. I have the privilege of hosting the UJ cloud debates, and then I had Professor Chilizi Marwala as my guest on his own platform, right? He spoke extensively about it, but without getting into the technical detail, the bigger issue is like, what's the buy-in? So it's obvious if there's a new way to use a phone compared to the old wire, then I'm going to use the new way. But what's the buy-in to using 4IR and other technology to filter through industry as a means of combating climate change?
Okay, so for our, like I said, the heart of the fourth industrial revolution is the advent of cyber-physical systems. So we have physical systems that currently exist, and of course physical systems stemming from engineering designs and engineering innovations, and plays a very important role in society as we know it. But the cyber-physical system is basically leveraging on cyber tools, computer algorithms, right, to get intelligence, right, to harness data about the operations of these physical tools, right, and then you assess that information, you analyze it, and you now make better decisions. So I give you an example. So for instance, you can have a machine, a physical machine, right, that operates normally. For instance, you think about ESCOM's plants that are often breaking down, right? So it breaks down and nobody can, as it were, forecast or know when it's going to do that, when it's going to break down. So with condition monitoring, for instance, which is leveraging on Internet of Things, advanced sensors, analytics, real-time condition monitoring of plants, for instance, you can analyze the operations of the plant in real time. You're able to proactively determine if there are deviations in the operating conditions of the plant, and then you're able to now take remedial action, preventive action, as opposed to being reactive. So really and truly, the physical system is still there, but 4IR in this case, you can leapfrog on 4IR and increase the reliability of that system by taking preventive measures that would not otherwise have been there.
And we need to do it.
Yeah, and we need to do that. Right.
Just lastly, I'm going to bring it back to this industry, around the built environment. All the issues you've spoken about. What's the message then to this audience who are switched on around cement and concrete and the whole built and building industries?
So the key message is that data, right? Data is the new oil, as Prof. Marola often says now, right? So any business that is operating now has to actively look at its operations, analyze the data, right? And from that data, determine its most optimal course of action, essentially obtaining actionable intelligence from that data. So we have a host of technologies that can be used for decarbonization. That knowledge is there. The IEA paper was published in 2018, right? And over the years, that knowledge has been there. But how can folks in the industry take advantage of that knowledge, take advantage of the data within the South African context, right? Where are the areas that we have a comparative advantage in having access to some of those raw materials, alternative fuels, for instance, like waste products, biomass, waste from tires, where do we have some of those raw materials? What are the technologies that we can harness to process those raw materials to be used in the cement manufacturing process? How do we conduct a scenario analysis, a comprehensive scenario analysis amidst all of the various technologies, amidst all of the various scenarios, to ensure now that in the medium to the long term, we adhere to our targets, 2030 and 2050, and we are able to wean ourselves of carbon in the cement manufacturing process. So my argument is that prescriptive analytics and blockchain can provide a veritable platform to unlock actionable business intelligence in the cement industry.
Okay, and we leave it at that. There's lots to talk about blockchain and its impact. Thank you very much.
All right,
let's get up here. Appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So a lot to learn from that. I hope you guys have made notes and quoted as well. I think the point made. I think data and data analytics, as you said, and therefore forecasting based on that is, it's in the context of South Africa with load shedding, it is definitely the new power, and the whole world's doing that, and those that grasp it quicker than others will be, I think in this case, to their benefit, right? Okay, before we get to the next speaker, I have a sense that people are begging for a half-an-hour break, but you're not going to get it. What you will get, you'll get a 2-minute break just to stand up, and I think you'd like that, yeah. Okay? 2 minutes, just chill. Don't go out. 2 minutes, right? Thank you. Yeah, I mean, we could give you 2 hours, but then you'll go home at 5 o'clock, and that's not going to happen. So, quick 2-minute break. Thank you. Are we all okay? Yeah, you can do it. You can set up your thing. Are you good?
Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah, looking forward to your conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's been interesting. Very much so.
I think you would have gone in detail.
It was actually very good. It was very good. Look, time is always a problem. Yeah, but it was very good. Because I enjoy analytics and data very much so. Yeah. Are you okay?
Thank you so much.
Okay, how? I think I'm on mic. Yeah, I think we're okay. Yeah. I know. Okay. Okay. Okay, we're going to start now again. So those that have run out, if we can just get them back in quickly. And if they're late, we'll start anyway, because we said 2 minutes, yeah. Well, 2 minutes ago we're going to start, something like that. Thank you. Oh, that's not too bad.
How's it, my brother? I'm good, I'm good. Being toasted. They're still coming.
Hey? It is, yeah. I think, but that's for the cameras as well. Always is. All right, can we go? I think we're going to go, yeah? You guys are ready on that side, right? Yeah. Okay. Let's get moving then. So the next of the 4 speakers, Mr. MYEZA from the Council Built Environment, the CEO, in fact. Good to have you on the platform. Applause for him, please. And since I've started with the others, I better ask you as well. I know you've got it in text here, but just what's your personal purpose?
Do good.
That's it, simple, do good. And what do you think the national purpose should be?
Implement what we agreed on.
Implement maybe the do good of what we all agree on.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll leave it to you. Looking forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, colleagues. I'm glad I'm speaking to the academics and industry players. I don't have to do protocols, and so I will have gone like 5 minutes doing protocols. So I think that's a privilege. The second disclaimer, program director, that I want to put, in the presence of academics, you have to reference and cite authors. So I'm not going to do that, Prof. Clinton. Just to make the point, I'll use a series of images just to convey a message. So that's the second disclaimer. The third one is just to confirm that MD and I did not coerce or caucus on our input. So it was done independently. So if there's a convergence of ideas, one can say great minds think alike. I'm not going to say that other part. And then the fourth one, yesterday I attended a session where we had colleagues from Stats SA. So they were dropping numbers, and I see MD started doing that. So he started by saying, do you know that, guys, we're now 60.6 million people in this country. Like, wow. And then he said, last week we were celebrating 80 billion people on Earth. And then he continued, do you know that 1.4 billion of those are in Africa? And we're like, okay. So the last one, 1.1 children were born last year. So 1.1 in South Africa. So that's a lot of kids. So I think the point I'm trying to demonstrate, colleagues, that we are dealing with big numbers. Just a couple of weeks ago, Minister of Finance announced that the country will be spending 812 billion rand over the medium term on infrastructure. So those are numbers that we are dealing with. So I thought, let me just start by giving that preamble. Just to indicate that, colleagues, if there is anything that you might remember about my presentation, it's just one thing. That young people are seeking opportunities to do what they were trained to do. And as public servants, some of us have the privilege to create opportunities for them to practice. And that's really the message I want to convey. Obviously, Prof. Clinton requested us to follow a particular sequence, so I'll quickly go through those slides quickly. But in the main, just to contextualize the built environment, I'm speaking to the converted, so I won't spend time. Just in brief, it's in 3 parts. And I think MD spoke at length about this, the inequality in this country. You don't have to go far. Just drive up M1, Sentin and Alexandra, it's romance and tragedy. That's really what you see in this country. It's just images that I was referring to, just to demonstrate the point. this is what we still deal with in South Africa. But I think what COVID did basically brought this to the fore in terms of inequalities, in terms of income and inequalities. I used to tell my colleagues that we're fortunate because we work for government. We didn't get salary cuts. Yet some of us stayed at home for 2 years, working from home. In the private sector, it was a bloodbath. So I think those are some of the things that we have to remind ourselves as public servants, that we are fortunate indeed. But women suffered the most. So women in the profession, you'll see the later slide, I'll demonstrate that women in general in the built environment are excluded. And it's something that we can't sit around this table. One of my colleagues made me realize that the panel is made up of, it's a boys' club. I'm not sure whether it was by design, but I think it's something that we should be mindful of moving forward, that we balance how we come across. So for a young girl watching us today, it's a group of men preaching about the built environment, about the concretizing program of government or the private sector. It's us. So it sends a particular message. Now, MD spoke about these things, so I'm just going to go through these slightly quickly. Yes, the private sector, post-COVID, or before COVID, struggled in getting opportunities. But for those who got opportunities, they still did a shabby job. So I can speak confidently. I worked for local government for 15 years, City of Joburg and City of Tshwane. So there are horror stories where a private company is given work, they don't do it. All what they do, they'll send you a variation order, stand in time because of the business forum that has come on site. And you discover that they didn't do certain things that they were supposed to do. Just having a meeting with communities and discuss 30%. I know there is an issue with the 30%, but I think we can do much more collectively. I think this issue, my colleagues become very uncomfortable when I raise it. Forget the semantics and the noise around the commission, the Zondo Commission, for example. As a sector, for those colleagues who understand Zulu, I'm from Richards Bay, so they say, so reflect. So when we talk about Midupi, cost escalation, and there were professionals there, our colleagues. So they allowed it to happen. And when the Zondo Commission came up, we had an engagement with my colleagues in the sector, and I challenged them. I said, maybe we need to issue a statement and say, South Africans, we are sorry, because we played part professionally. I'm not talking about the politics of it, as professionals. Yes, there was a CEO and a CFO, but there was an electrical engineer, there was a mechanical engineer, there was a QS there was a project manager. What role did we play as professionals? So I think those are some of the things that we need to think about. I think the issue of climate change, we saw what happened in Durban. So I attended a green building conference a couple of weeks ago in Cape Town. So my view was, we need to acknowledge those who do better, who plan around the fact that there's climate change. But you can't be praising fish for swimming. So at universities, we are taught about climate change and its impact. So how do you design a road that does not take into account flash flooding that will be experienced in the next coming years? How do you build a building that does not take into account, a PROF was speaking about COP27. And I think those are some of the things that we need to think about as an industry. When I joined this organization a year ago, I was told that I can't go to a gathering without speaking about what CBE does. So I'm not going to bore you with that, just to go through the slides. really, it's as any public entity, we derive our mandate from the Constitution. We're one of the entities within Public Works Department. So there are 4 entities within Public Works. It's CBE, CIDB, Agreement SA, and IDT. Within the CBE environment, we've got 9 professional councils, namely your EXA, your SACEP, the architects, QSs, property valuers, landscape architects, and project managers. In addition to that, because we appreciate that the built environment is broad, we also entered into working arrangements with environmentalists, the geomatics, as well as planners. So that's really what makes Council for the Built Environment. Our agenda is very straightforward. Like I made the point earlier, that it's about transforming the built environment, not just in terms of numbers, but the sector itself. I made a reflection about this panel today. How do you ensure that we drive skills development, working with universities, obviously, and create opportunities for young people? Obviously, transformation's got different connotation and description, but I think for the purpose of this input, really, it's about how do we create opportunities for young people to participate in this sector. These numbers, colleagues, are important in a sense that we are aware that there are colleagues who have gone through universities, acquired qualification, but transition out of the built environment sector. And they're not also registered with any councils. There are a number of reasons that get cited, be it gatekeeping in councils, what's the value of being registered. There are a series of reasons. In a municipal environment where I was, very few colleagues were registered with professional councils, but we expect them to drive infrastructure projects. So you can't hold them responsible for anything. But yet when there's a tender that we issue, we request all of these compliance issues. So someone on the other side evaluating the same tender is not required to comply. So I know it's a pain to comply, but I think it's important because you can't be a doctor without going through a compliance process. So I always make this point with my colleagues at CIDB. Please go, is there a media here? Don't quote me. I always say to them, guys, you must stop this thing of just registering everyone who is breathing and have a wheelbarrow. But a student who comes from a university after having gone through a 4-year degree, because they haven't done any work, they can't register. But me, as a nurse, I'll come and say, I want to start a construction company at CIDB. I'm given a grade. So I think that's a contestation that we need to have as professionals amongst ourselves. These figures, colleagues, are not good, but there is context to them. I was in Parliament and I was lambasted for not transforming the industry. I don't transform the industry, I just communicate the numbers that I get. But obviously the question is, what do we do collectively? I think it takes 10 years, roughly, for someone to become a PR. So if you assume that you intervene at a high school level in Standard 8, Standard 8 is what? Hey, I left school a long time ago. Oh, grade 10. So you intervene at grade 10, so you're going to support this young kid until matric. From matric, they go to university. PROF, if they're lucky, they will finish in 4 years. That's 7 years. Now, that's a tricky part. Depending on where they studied, be it at UKZN or vendor or vets, they'll get an in-service training or candidate placement. So EXA has 4 years. Town planning, 2 years. Architect, 2 years. That's 9 years. Depending whether they've got a mentor or not. So they'll finish their candidacy program in 3 years. That's 10 years later to get a professional. And then Prof, MD, you said they are leaving. So when they leave, we're going to have a problem. So the next slide confirms the point. These are people who are stuck at the candidacy level. So you see that engineers makes the bulk of these people. But yet we need to drive infrastructure. We just announced 812 billion rand. Our people are living. The next slide will demonstrate to you, for those who are staying, they are also between the ages of, that's where the bulk of our professionals are. So if this number leaves, or in the next 10 years, unless we unblock this, I think that's when we talk about the skills challenge in the country. So we're not being dramatic when we say there might be a skills challenge if we don't unblock this. So these young people, they need sites where they can be mentored, supported, gain professional registration, and be ready to assist the country in driving the infrastructure. Now, I've basically presented the economic recovery plan. So there's a temptation that we'll talk about the construction sector, because that's what is in the public domain. But the built environment starts with a town planner, a project manager doing costing, QSs. There's a lot of background work that gets done before you go on site. So when it happened, the lockdown happened, people could not submit building plans to municipalities because our systems are not geared to have that kind of interface. Architects lost jobs. So you don't have to do research, Prof. You just drive around and see how many cranes do you see in Sentin, or how many cranes you saw a year ago, if you're lucky. Yes, there has been, I would say, a restart of the industry, but it's very slow because public sector doesn't have the capacity also to drive this process. So in the main, colleagues, the point I want to drive is that our reconstruction and development, reconstruction and recovery plan for the built environment, including the construction sector, it should be about where do we get this pipelines of projects that would enable the industry to start. So government can announce, but do we have the capacity as a state to, working with the private sector, obviously? How do we improve the performance of the sector itself just to deliver on time? I was involved a couple of years ago on the Tshwane House project in Pretoria. It was a 1 billion rand project. The project manager submitted 15 variation orders. 15. I rejected all of them. The building is up and running. So there's that level of honesty from the industry as well. So I understand project managers, how they get paid, but there must be an ethical behavior that we instill. I know at varsity you teach ethics, professional ethics. You must practice it. It's very difficult because you can lose your job. I think Prof spoke about the issue of green economy. How do we, as a sector, participate in that space? And how do we get trusted by communities that what we do is right? And just to close, the business forum, when you ask construction managers and the colleagues in the sector, they say it's not us. It's the veterans. But the bottom line is, it gives a particular image about the sector itself. So if you've got a young girl who wants to study construction manager, they'll think twice because they're going to be held hostage. In Tshwane, that was our daily lives. I don't know how many times I was held hostage, ASHRAF, by the business forum, seeking 30% on something that had nothing to do with us. We happened to be in the executive, obviously. So we said, okay, let's call the project team and the company that appointed and everyone else around the table. I said, no, we want money, not the project. So it's a very difficult environment to operate within. So just to conclude my point, we all accept that there has been a destruction of the industry during COVID, but the sector needs to accept that it must commit to transformation issues, to do things right, and ultimately create jobs for young people. So the next slides that I would have actually presented after this really captures that. Because at the end of the day, it's about human beings. So everything that we do, let's think about that beneficiary. So when you don't deliver a waste treatment plant on time in Amanskraal, people there, they won't have water. So if we can, from where we're sitting, as we think about the cost, the recovery plan for the industry or for the sector, we accept that this is what it is about. It's about people. And that's the message I would like to convey. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Lots to think about. Join us. We'll have a quick chat. There we are.
I don't have answers.
You don't have... You know what's the good news? Nobody else has answers either, so we don't have to worry about that. All right, you don't have answers. Who has the answers?
It's here.
But okay, seriously, I mean, you've raised lots of issues. I mean, transformation was uppermost from the speakers, and I can tell you now, having chatted with the team, there was an issue of getting females on, and it just didn't happen, but it was like there, in inverted commas, like, where are they? It's a problem, right? Yeah. But that's for today. But you talking about the entire industry, not just in terms of women, but also in terms of our own disadvantaged backgrounds. So let's start with the biggest stakeholder of the whole lot in the country, which is not just the people, but the power lies with government, right? Mm. What is government doing? What can they do?
I think for me, I'm just going to express a personal view. Government commits to things, and government is made up of people that works there in the value chain. So jokingly, one of my colleagues was saying there is a number one, which is the president. There is number two, which is ministers. Number three is DGs, and. There's a value chain in government. And I think if we as public servants can subscribe to the standards that we expect society to subscribe to, I think we'll go a long way. If you're a cleaner where you work, just clean. If my job is to approve an application in terms of a developer coming to submit, just do that.
But why don't they? What I'm saying is, why don't they? Why don't we? Is it that we don't see the benefit in just cleaning besides getting a salary?
I made a point earlier, I think it was a snide remark, that when there was lockdown, government officials got paid full salary.
And the rest didn't?
The rest didn't. Others lost jobs. So we as a government servant, we don't feel the impact of the decisions that we do not make or we make. So
I mean, that's worth a quote. Just say that again. I want people to make notes, and those who are on social media to tweet that. That's so important. Just repeat that.
Oh, okay. I was freestyling. So. No, I was saying basically as government officials, we don't feel the impact of the decision we make or we do not make.
You got that, right? We don't feel the impact of the decisions we make or don't make.
Yeah.
As government, public servants in that
yes.
case. Yeah. But that's the nub of the problem with regard to service delivery across the board, isn't it?
Yes, that's really the issue. And I think until we realize that, I think we'll go a bit far as a country. And I'm not downplaying what colleagues do and what other colleagues do in different sectors of society. But in general, sometimes you're even scared to say you work for government because people assume that you're incompetent, you are lazy. Okay. If you're not lazy, you are corrupt. And so I think there is that introspection that we must do as government servants as well. I think that's why government has come up with this professionalism in the public sector. I know it sounds cliche, but I think it's a good start. Other countries are worried about the economy, how to turn around the economy. In this country, we are concerned about how to train people on ethics.
Yeah. Sure. How? You know, you made the point about the value chain, and as the value chain appears, like, I get the impression from president down, it's just like delegate, 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 but it goes all the way down. But when you finally get down to the bottom of the value chain, which is the biggest number, which is us, the people, right? I mean, there is a sense of helplessness, and I don't mean just in the built environment, but I mean, you know, across the board. We don't have to mention 50 other things, from health to obviously power, electricity, and for me, as someone who wants to inspire the building of a champion nation, we're like completely at opposite ends, right? So what needs to happen first? Because what I'm saying, we have organizations, we have committees. It's not like we don't have we have the infrastructure. We have an elected government, represented, you know, elected by the people, right? But what needs to change at the bottom so that those people like yourself, and you've admitted that, and others will understand their role and take their role far more seriously?
You asked a question earlier about our national purpose.
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether you got an answer. The answer was around how do we implement, how do we get the habit of just doing. And I think perhaps if we can start there to have that appreciation that let's do something. If it's wrong, it's okay. At least we'd have done something. So what we do, we'll have a LEKULA, a Bosperat, an Indaba, a workshop, a conference, a summit, and. So we never get to do. And I'm not saying we shouldn't speak to each other. It's important. But just get to a habit of just doing.
I mean, do you get a sense that we're not urgent? I mean, is that the issue?
It's not.
Because, you know, 2010 is interesting, and I won't go into the whole debate about the role of the building industry in 2010, but what it did in 2010 is a deadline was set for us by FIFA, well, not such a great leadership organization anyway, right? It was set for us. It sucked in an entire nation to fulfill that deadline and to prove to the world that we're a 9 out of 10 nation, which is what Sepp Blatter gave us at the end, and I was there at the press conference. Like, so we were completely driven for 5 or 10 years to show the world that in 1 month we will be absolutely world-class in everything we do, and in fact we did, right? So why can't we sustain that? Not to please FIFA, but to please 60 million people. Like, what's missing there?
We have an NDP, for example. I think we're a couple of years away from 2030. Just Google reports on what we have done, on what we've committed as a country. Okay, I'm not discounting COVID because it took away 2 years of our productivity, and it drove us back to higher level of unemployment and. But the bottom line is we had made commitments as a country to say we'll do these things by 2030. How far are we? I could present that. You'll see that we said something, everyone was excited about it. We didn't follow through. And I don't know how many colleagues here interface with either municipalities. So just to get your application approved, it doesn't matter who you are. There will be a memo from this one to that one, a circular, and a meeting to discuss just an application that came to me on whether it's in compliance with the regulations. Approve, yes, no. A developer on the other side is waiting for that decision to be made. So I think for me the message really, it's about professionalism. It's not about slogans. It's about practicing it. You go to a doctor, you expect to be assisted. So if you're a civil engineer working in a municipal environment, act like one. So don't say, no, they are government people. Those are government people. So young people come into government, they adopt or simulate the culture that is bad.
Yeah, I mean, I love using sporting analogies because they work, right? They're just so easy to understand. You know, in the sports field, and particularly it happens in rugby too, but particularly in cricket, soccer rather, football, and we've seen it at all the stadiums in the world, but clearly in South Africa. When a player is not performing well, but in South Africa we do that, right? It's like, make the change. So how is it that you still love the team, you love the team, you love the player, but you accept he's not playing well on the day, or she's not playing well on the day, and you want to make a substitution? How is it we are unable to see that scenario and link that to every other facet of our lives to say, you know, do what you're supposed to do, you need to win us a game?
MD talked about leadership. So leadership across society, not only for those in government. Sometimes you can lead from the back, sometimes lead from the front. I think that's what perhaps we need to challenge ourselves collectively. How do we lead this nation Because the numbers that we have currently, all of them are bad. Unemployment, GBV, poverty, inequality, all of them. We don't have numbers that are shooting up.
Yeah.
So I think we accept that we can't do everything, but let's get certain things right, and let's do certain things, at least try and gain the trust. And I think that's really where the issue is. And the partnership with the private sector is very important, where the private sector can believe that when we commit to something, we'll do it. So private sector is sitting, waiting for government to come to the party, but they don't trust us. And I think that bridging that gap between us as the public service and the private sector will actually assist us somehow, because the 2010 example you're using, there was that partnership and trust that we commit certain things and we'll do them together because there is that target that we're looking for. Right now, I get a sense that we're operating in parallel. But that's a view I hold. But I think maybe just to address the issue of skills pipeline that maybe I would have spent time on, because the turnaround of the industry will require these young people to come to the fore. And I think we were exposed recently when the president asked us to give them a list of young people who are trained in mechanical, electrical engineering to assist ESCOM, for example. We couldn't give them. They are available, but we couldn't find them.
You couldn't find it, yeah.
So I think that's where also data, I think Prof was talking about data. How do you use data that we have to make informed decisions? We get lambasted by young people to say we're sitting at home, but you say they are no skilled young people, and others have transitioned from the industry to other sectors. And I think we need to rethink on how best we manage the pool that we have so that it can assist us.
But I mean, you gave that example of, matric and then 2 years and 2 years, and how can they be lost in the system after that long investment? I mean, that's an important one. Now, I think in terms of your talk, which is in broad speak about, transformation and things that are going wrong, we won't repeat too much. There's not much. There's no time, in fact. But it's recorded, as we know. So all of us, not only this talk, I mean, all the others, we can watch them and re-watch them on the PPC LinkedIn as well as on YouTube channels, right? So I'll leave that for you. But maybe the last thing from your side now, to zero in back into the built environment specifically, right? Without repeating any of the things you've said already, what if you could advise, the built environment, that industry, we're talking of the PPCs of the world and everybody else, right? If you could advise them now to do one thing right now with extreme urgency, what would that be?
Tap into the energies of young people. Create space for them. They will disrupt, but they will take us forward.
I think that needs a clap. It's very important, yeah. Let's leave it at that.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated. There we are. Well, lots to think about there. Just by the way, talking about the tapping of the energy, I've probably repeated the story 3 times now in the last week. The country manager for H&M, right? Carolyn Nelson. She's from Ireland. I was at a forum a few weeks ago, and I asked about the USP of South Africa, and she said, South Africa's USP is the level of innovation among South Africa's youth. Whether it comes from desperation, desperation causes you to innovate, right? Whatever the reasons may be, she said, she's based in Cape Town, she said, look at South Africa's youth. They are up there with innovative thinking that can compete with the very best in the world. The challenge for all of us is she's saying, look at them, are we looking at them? Something to think about. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Much appreciated. Right, let's move on then to the fourth of I was saying 4 speakers. In fact, there's 5 in total coming up, right? So, DELON, PERUMAL, if you can come up, please. Thank you. Good seeing you once again, Head of Operations at the PPC Group. And as I've done now with everybody else, because it seems like the purpose issue becomes a driving force of your own personal agenda, right? So your personal purpose?
Well, I think I did send it. But
you should remember it.
It is very, let's say, close to home. It's very simply just to be the best dad and the best husband to my family, but make sure we do it with humility.
Okay, beautiful. Now extend that to the national purpose. What should it be?
So to coin a phrase, and there's been various terms used, but it's very simple. Plan, do, check, act.
Just repeat that?
Plan, do, check, act. Okay. If we can do that, we're on the right path.
Okay, let's see you do that. Thank you so much. Looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, ASHRAF, and good morning. Still good morning, yeah. Good morning to everyone. So, I'll begin by taking you through what we call PPC's decarbonization journey. But I thought it's important to start with this slide. Some of you may be familiar with it, some maybe not. It's actually a slide that usually comes through in any market update, in our results presentation, etc., etc. And it's what we call PPC's value creation framework. And the reason I put it up there, because it talks to why decarbonize. In the PPC's value creation framework, you'll see reference to being environmentally and socially acceptable with sustainable operations. This is not something that's just started because net zero has been a buzzword in the past 18 months. This framework has existed within PPC, I think, as long 10, 15 years ago, obviously evolved over time. But it's about creating a better life for all, whilst ensuring that the social and environmental aspects are fully much entrenched in what we do. And I thought it's just important just to highlight that this decarbonization journey, the net zero, is not a new thing. It's been part of us, of the way we've operated. For sure, perhaps never pinned down with clear plans, and hopefully I'll show you some of that. But this is where we've taken the step forward to pin those plans down. So if we look at the drivers for decarbonization, and again, stemming from the previous slide, very simply put, we have to create a better quality of life for all, to create those long-lasting legacies. That's as simple as a motivation as one could have, irrespective of what other drivers there may be. And to underpin that, in November last year, we launched what was called the TCFD report, which is the Task Force for Financial Related Climate Disclosures. And within that report, we set out our specific targets and what are we going to do from 2020 to 25 to 2030 and up to 2050. And I'll touch on that a bit later. But as part of that report, and as part of that assessment, and the Prof referred to modeling and understanding different impacts, we very much focused on climate risks, what it meant for different operations. We have operations, for example, close to the equator, Rwanda, DRC, where rainfall exists for probably 8 to 10 months in a year. It's either there's rain or there's heavy rain. There's no in between. So flooding is part and parcel of how we designed that plan. But to understand what would happen in excessive flooding was modeled. And from there, what would be the operational impact? What would be the key interventions to mitigate that? And that formed part of this exercise in determining these targets. And obviously, naturally, what would be the impact on communities? Because wherever we operate, we've got close links to the communities without which we cannot sustain our operation. So understanding those two and what it means from an operational plan point of view. Then also in terms of the regulatory framework, the legislative frameworks are constantly evolving. We have to comply. PPC has been very deliberate in getting our operations to the required compliance levels. And where we've had shortfalls, we've focused on engagements with local government, even up to ministerial level as well, in terms of what we plan to do where there are shortfalls. But we have to move towards that. But when you consider things like carbon tax, we all accept that carbon tax is ever-changing. South Africa has decided to choose that path, but we have to respond. And there's two ways one could respond, is to try and push back and say, no, 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 or we say, okay, we'll take it for what it is, and then we try and align our plans to see how we can mitigate that impact. Easier said than done, because you cannot, the carbon tax trajectory that's being proposed is very aggressive, but we believe it needs some toning down in terms of supporting the just transition framework that the country is on. So those are the key, let's call it, drivers to decarbonize. So considering all of that, this was the ambition that we set out last year. And we call it the PPC's ambition to net zero that is defined. So coming off a baseline of FY 2020, we said by FY 25 we're going to move from 756 kg CO2 per ton of cement to 680. Now that's just not a target, because in between that target you see we've allocated CAPEX. CAPEX not just driven towards driving CO2, CAPEX driven towards improving operational efficiencies and operational outputs that have a direct impact on reducing our CO2 footprint. Beyond FY25, we then said, going up to 2030, we're going to try and get towards a 550. And again, there we see significantly much more CAPEX allocation. The reason no number was determined because a lot of the feasibilities assessments were being done, still being done, and are still to be done. But our plans evolve year on year. But it is a peg in the ground. We said we're going to get there by 2030, and that's what we are driving towards. And then longer term, towards the 2050, we are aspiring towards getting towards net zero. Now, important to frame here, you see something called Scope 1 and Scope 2. This is referring to things within our ambit of control, so within our operations. We are not talking about reducing the CO2 footprint beyond the supply chain, which what the Prof referred to earlier. That normally what one typically refers to as Scope 3. That being said, this was the approach we adopted at the time, and I'll touch on it a bit later. We are constantly evaluating, do we need to take it to that next step? But it has certain repercussions, including financially. So I thought I'd put this slide up. The Prof also covered this slide, but I think perhaps with a bit more numbers. So everybody knows that the key input material in cement manufacturing is limestone, and it's called calcium carbonate for all the academics here. Now, by the very nature of transforming this calcium carbonate to get calcium oxide and CO2, you inherently have a DNA of CO2. You cannot get rid of it. You need the limestone. So off the bat, you start off with, let's call it, in this example, about 480 tons of CO2 per kg of cement. Now that, in our terms, represents approximately 50%. 50% hard to abate, you cannot get away from. But there are things that can be done. Moving on from the fact that we have to use this limestone, we then have to process fuel. And typically that fuel is coal, which we're trying to move away from. But in the process of processing those fuels, that contributes another 40% of CO2. So between limestone and fuels, we have a 90% CO2 footprint, right, which we have some levers to pull, but the 50%, the DNA is ingrained. One cannot move away from it for now. There are a few other options, which I will touch on a bit later. The other 10% is largely made up of the energy required to transform our intermediate product, which is the clinker, into that fine product that you see in the cement bag. So there's a lot of energy, electrical energy required in the grinding, milling, packing, transporting, et cetera, within the plant itself. So electrical energy contributes about 8 to 9% of CO2. The other 1% is just the diesel that we use for mining fleet, for starting up our process, et cetera. So just important so when you see the levers that we're talking about, this is what the actual DNA is of CO2 within a cement plant. So what are we focusing on? And again, the Prof very accurately covered a lot of the enablers. And these are the actual items that cement players and PPC specifically are focusing on. We are focusing primarily first on our, what we call overall equipment efficiency. Simply put, it's how well we get our equipment to run at their design outputs, because running it efficiently will reduce your CO2 footprint because you're putting an optimal amount of energy. You're optimizing the usage of your raw materials. Built around that, we spoke about artificial intelligence, but we're talking about here expert control and automation. We're talking about building the skills, reviving programs to uplift the new intake, the new graduates coming into our workforce. And another key lever is efficient technologies. Now, I'm not saying we're going to build a new cement plant, but we currently, when we look at replacements, when we look at upgrades, it is a bare minimum that high energy efficiency standards are a prerequisite for the equipment that we receive. On the product innovation side, so this refers to how well we take this clinker and combine it with all these other products. We are looking at optimizing what we call these extenders or supplementary cementitious materials. The additives that we use to enhance performance, to enhance how we produce our products. There's some extensive R&D going in terms of that. And there is something called limestone calcined clay cements, which we are focusing on. Something that is gaining in momentum within the cement industry, and we are, let's say, in the very, very early stages of this, but we've got some firm plans in place, which I'll touch on as well. Alternative fuels and raw materials, the Prof mentioned that. How do we incorporate that? And not all alternative fuels have a lower CO2 footprint. I think it's important to say that. You've got to be very specific, very deliberate on which ones. And not all of them will decarbonize, but it is important that we get them within our system because they serve a wider need in terms of the waste management for the country and how we can play a role in that. And then lastly, the use of renewables, typically solar and wind power. We have evaluated waste heat recovery options, potentially some use of methane gas in one of our operations. And we're keeping a close eye on what green hydrogen could play for the cement industry. So let's go into just some of the details. I'll start off with calcined clay. So why calcined clay? And I think we all know that, perhaps not so much for South Africa, but the fly ash will dwindle in the coming years as we move away from coal-fired power station. Slags as well, access to them become a challenge. And what we call natural pozzolans, those materials that are highly reactive, which when you combine with our product gives a very good performing cement. They are not easily available. Fortunately enough, in Rwanda, we actually do have access to pozzolana, which strategically is a big plus for us, both operationally and also from a CO2 point of view. But in generally speaking, they are not easily available. So calcined clay represents that opportunity of providing an alternative material that's highly reactive and that can be used with our clinker to produce a very good performing cement. So is there a business case for calcined clay? And the simple answer is absolutely yes. Clay deposits are abundantly available, specifically in Africa. The key processing advantage of making calcined clay is the temperature at which you need to process it. To put it in perspective, when we manufacture our clinker, we need to reach temperatures of 1500 degrees C, give or take. With calcined clay, you literally have to get to about 700 to 900 degrees C. From an energy input point of view, it's literally a third less. So it makes natural sense that if you can get a material that's reactive, lower energy intensity, it will have a lower CO2 footprint. It is most certainly going to contribute towards reducing our clinker factor. So the amount of clinker we use per ton of cement, it's most certainly going to reduce our coal requirements, and it will have an impact on our CO2 tax liabilities. The knock-on impact as well is it will also have the ability to extend our limestone reserves in areas where limestone reserves are potentially a challenge. But the benefits are far wide. Now, in terms of, in terms of where we are with it. So within the South African context, we are quite far in a project plan to bring in calcined clay, and the same with Zimbabwe. The opportunities exist within other operations, but we see this as a key lever to reducing our our clinker factor in our cements. Naturally, let me say that no matter what we do, we will conform to all the standards that we operate in. We will have to go through the various regulations to get approval, et cetera, et cetera. And for sure, cement performance will never be compromised in ensuring that our premium product offering is always maintained, no matter what products we bring into the market. So renewable energy, and I think this is a topic everybody in this room is fully aware of, the challenges with ESCOM and the grid, et cetera, but it is extremely important for both the economy and a sustainable cement industry. Just in terms of some of the projects that we are looking at, I think I can highlight that in Zimbabwe, we are quite advanced in putting up a 30 megawatt solar PV plant. Now, what's unique about this plant that at our kiln operation, we are putting in what is a battery backup solution. Now, this is specifically designed to mitigate the unstable grid that we always get in the Zimbabwean context. And this will allow us to keep our operations running during those, firstly, lack of supply and unstable supply. Within the South African context, we've recently installed some rooftop solar, and we are continuing to deploy that. And there's a few other projects in the pipeline for our larger facilities where we're looking at power wheeling options. That being said, the plans are there, some are in motion, some have stalled. The key here is to have proper engagement, a more conducive environment that will enable the use of solar within the energy mix. Zimbabwe, for example, allows users to push energy back into the grid, what they call banking or what they call even wheeling. Speaking to different people here, you'll hear different views. It exists, but there's challenges, and that is where our focus needs to go in to unlock those barriers that will allow us to get more solar energy within the grid. Alternate fuels. Now, why is alternate fuels so useful for us as an industry? Firstly, the cement kiln, just by its nature, the fact that it uses limestone, is ideally suited for processing of alternate fuels, and specifically waste, because of the scrubbing nature of the limestone. It scrubs out all the harmful gas, it puts it back into the clinker, and you do not see it. It becomes inert. So the cement kilns are well positioned. Some examples, if you had to look in within the European context and even in the German cement industry specifically, some kilns are running on 100% waste fuels. The reason they can do that is because they have a legislative framework and an environment that endorses that and that enables it, where the cement kiln is seen as a viable processor and they get a processing fee for that. Now, we have a long way to go. For sure, alternative fuels is a key lever for us in getting off coal, but there's other aspects that is required to be driven in the South African context to enable us to move from our current levels of, let's say, 5–10% to 50, 80, even 100%. Now, we've already established our ability to process it. In the Western Cape, we're processing tires. In Rwanda, we're doing what is called biomasses, palm kernels, rice husks, up to 12% replacement. And there's plans in place to increase that much more aggressively as well. So, in terms of the last lever that we're looking at that will assist us in decarbonization, it's around skills, it's around development of skills, partnering with academic institutions, not only partnering with development of people, but also in R&D. You know, that is a key requirement moving forward for us. I think a key focus area currently, and it talks to artificial intelligence, is the whole use of data analytics. So currently we have a project underway in Zimbabwe where we are looking at the use of AI to run our kiln operation, and there's an assessment as well for a few of our operations in South Africa. Now, how does that improve efficiencies or industrial excellence. So I can liken it to, if you consider your motor vehicle. When you get up to a certain speed, you put in cruise control. You do nothing. It maintains it, it runs it, optimizes what needed to do, and you sit back. In the same way, cement kilns have these control systems in place that allow one to take it up to a certain speed and keep it at optimum levels. It has been in around for probably 20, 30 years at different levels of integration, but now we see the use of artificial intelligence and data analytics coming on above that to take it to the next level, and that is a key focus area for us going forward. Now, all that being said, these are the things we can do, but ultimately we're still left with that DNA, that 50%. And the only way to get towards net zero, as things stand right now, is to look at some form of what is called carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration. So all this means taking the gas, processing it through a series of processes, and then ending up with a material, be it in the form of a limestone, for example, as one technology provider is proposing, or the manufacturing of fertilizer, for example. So these are a few projects that are currently being focused on. In fact, in the last quarter of this year, or let me say first quarter of next year, we are going to be piloting a small-scale carbon capture utilization sequestration plant at one of our major operations in Limpopo in partnership with government. And it is still small scale, but it is the first step to show the intent that this technology has to go hand in hand with how we decarbonize. And it is imperative. To get towards net zero, you're not going to do it alone focusing on those enablers. This has to form part of the mix. It is highly CapEx intensive, but you have to start now. So I think, just in summary again, as the industry leader, we've embarked on the journey, we've set out our commitments, and it's there for everyone to see. The strategic planning processes will always be informed by physical climate risk and opportunities to drive down our emissions. At the regional level, we've got our plans in place with clear defined roadmaps. I mentioned the TCFD report, and that was the methodology we used. We will continuously evaluate that and the potential of whether we're going to go down the science-based target approach as well. The decarbonization enablers also provides PPC with opportunities for new revenue streams. And no matter what we do, we will always look at value accretion to go hand in hand with how we decarbonize. We will leverage off our regional footprint and product portfolio. And I think the last point is engagement with regulators and key stakeholders is fundamental to breaking down some of those barriers to enable us to push forward with our decarbonization strategy. And that's it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Join us, like the hot seat. Not that hot. Thank you for your time. Right, a few questions. Let's talk about, you spoke about the legislative framework. So what is it at the moment, and how would you like to see it shift? Because you're comparing it to other countries, right?
Yeah. So if one considers, and I'll reference the European market, so they have a zero landfill policy. We do not. And in the absence where you have an alternative way to channel something, that will always be the easier. So we can have a legislative framework that says, yes, cement kilns can decarbonize, yes, they are acknowledged as being users of waste. But if you have an alternative that doesn't close that, then it's a challenge. So the legislative framework needs to be all-encompassing, not just siloed, if I can.
And if that's the case, I mean, to what degree is PPC, for example, able to input into government and other stakeholders around possible changes?
So I would say one of PPC's strength is stakeholder engagement. And we have various forums in which we engage together with SEMCON SA as well. Through all legislation that comes through, it goes through our channels, and we have various also stakeholder forums that we engage with the governments. A typical example being the carbon capture project that I mentioned about. That is an engagement directly with government to see what we can do to drive the carbon capture agenda or the carbon capture philosophy within the South African context. I mean, it's not something that people would have known that can happen in Africa. Everyone refers it to Europe, but it can happen. It's just that engagement.
Fair enough. To what degree, therefore, does, let's say, on two levels, your employees within PPC Africa buy into understanding the impact of of the carbon footprint on climate change and therefore the harming the planet? That's them, but at the same time also your other stakeholders. I'm talking about people that you guys do business with.
So again, and I put up the first slide as well, just to highlight that it's continuously awareness in all our forums. That's the one. And a key point of what I mentioned about our plans, it's ingrained within our operational targets, which means from a scorecard point of view, it filters down down to the shop floor level, because they understand that these are the drivers. This is what we're getting to. CO2 exists, CO2 per ton cement exists in each and every one of our scorecards. So that's from an internal focus point of view. From a community, it's just continuous engagement. We have stakeholder forums at each plant, which our general managers run with, and we continuously are engaging with them, making them aware of the different projects, getting their input on it as well.
And then other service providers, I'm talking of not the small person, but like say the large ones, are you in a position where you impose on them, you insist that they comply to your vision around the carbon footprints, or else?
So I would say I think that's still in the early stages. And I mentioned the last point of the possibility of science-based targets. If we do go down that route, then the supply chain becomes a key enabler in making sure that our CO2 footprint is at the optimum levels. So if we do go down that route, then most certainly we would be asking suppliers to comply.
Now, it's interesting, we started talking about regulatory framework and and compliance and getting people to understand that it's better. Now, it's unrelated, but it's related with regard to this fancy word called load shedding. I mean, the UK is having their own load shedding, by the way, just so you know. But what they're doing now is they're incentivizing people to switch off. So, or they were tabling it yesterday, I think, in Parliament or the relevant body. So there's no official load shedding as it stands like that. But it's like, if you commit that you would switch off for 5 hours a day, but I don't, you'll get paid X amount in some form or the other. I mean, is that, so as opposed to a punishment, an incentivization to speed up the process?
So for our operation, it needs to run 24/7. In fact, stopping it will have the adverse impact of creating more efficiencies, higher CO2. So I do not think that would work in our environment for our big units. Do we get requested to switch off? Yes, but we choose specific units that do not have a direct impact on, let's say, thermal efficiency, for example. But for our larger units, that model will not be sustainable for us achieving our overall efficiency.
Well, I mean, I think that's understandable, right? But I mean, the point, therefore, is that even with your service providers, is there a way where you would innovate and incentivize them? I'm talking down the line about different models as opposed to punishment. To say, if you do this, we will do that for you.
Absolutely. Perhaps in the longer term, that could be for the value chain something to be explored.
I mean, we have important stakeholders here. You referenced the issues of product innovation, and I mean, that's important, but again, I'll bring it back to the issues of carbon footprint. How much more can you tell us about that?
So I mentioned the calcined clay cements, and I also highlighted the fact that no matter what product innovation we do, conformance to standards will always guide us. The EN standards in which we manufacture our products. Some of the interventions are still early days in terms of R&D, other materials that we are looking at, but there will be processes followed from a stakeholder point of view, from a customer point of view. We're just not going to bring in products without going through the normal testing regime, normal sensitization of customers, engagement, etc., etc.
And your MD in Njombo spoke earlier on about leadership, I think at length, right? And understandably in terms of his position. To what degree, therefore, does PPC Africa adopt its leadership space on the continent in your category around cement, right? To the point where you become the industry leader in in effect, not just doing business, but doing business for good and effecting change in communities?
So if I were to just bring it very simply, if you look at all the spaces or the regions in which we operate, we were the first to come out with our commitments. We were the first to put a peg in the ground. Granted, there may have been international players that did it, but we put that peg in the ground without, let's say, pressure from investors or pressure from stakeholders. It was the right thing to do, and we did it. I mean, we're talking almost a year and a half before COP27 even came out.
Okay.
So the commitment is there, and it is something that is driven from our ExCo level all the way down to the shop floor.
Okay. I mean, lastly, in terms of your presentation, it's very intense, and I think it needs a relook at from many people. That's why we have it, have access online. But is there anything else not in the presentation that is a particular concern for you that you really want to get off your chest?
Not really. I mean, I think we've been very clear in terms of what we need to do. For sure, if there's one thing, and I think a few speakers spoke about it, it's moving away from just saying we have this discussion, we want to decarbonize, but let's go with the supportive administrative framework, the legislative framework. It cannot happen on our own. Decarbonization is CAPEX intensive, but we have to be very specific of what we do, make sure there's value creation across the channels, but it cannot happen alone. We have to do it in partnership.
Perhaps having a good thought again is when we think about social activism on various forms, gender-based violence, racism, then of course the green gases, all that sort of thing. You do tend to think about NGO type of activists out on the streets, drumming support. What you don't see is, by and large, is business leading the activism race, even if it means against themselves. I mean, radical, yeah, but I mean, is that the type of thing we need to be looking at?
So I actually think by putting out a position, we are doing that. In fact, we've put ourselves out there. I can comfortably say none of our competitors have actively put it out there to say they may be doing it, but to put a peg in the ground and to be open about it and to put a number to it. And like I said, it's been part of our strategy for many years, but to start putting numbers and saying it's part of our CAPEX plan, it's, for me, setting the bar.
Okay, there's the activist in you. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time. Good talking to you once again. Right, so the fifth and the last of the speakers before we say the goodbyes, and there's lunch, of course, right? That comes up just now. Professor Clinton AIGBAVBOA, who we had before, of course, to welcome you. So here's your take two once again. But let's start with, I know you messaged me, but probably it's better just to amplify it. What's your purpose?
Yeah, I think my purpose in life is actually to make the most of my life and also to contribute to whoever comes around me.
Okay, contribute to whatever comes around you.
Yep.
And what do you think the national purpose ought to be?
Yeah, I think the national purpose, considering the issues in the country, it should be to actually maximize the life of South Africans and likewise our resources.
Maximize the lives of South Africans and the resources.
Yes.
Well, make a note of that. Thank you. Okay,
Thank you very
looking
much.
forward to your presentation.
Right. Thank you very much. I think I'm not going to stand in your way and lunch. I'm just going to try my best to make it very short. And I hope in this particular session, I will be able to kind of really speak to a subject that is dear to my heart, which is on the construction industry, looking at how to digitalize it. But what I'm going to talk about shortly is what actually does digitalization mean for the South African construction industry. And I'm going to use two words synonymously, digitalization and 4i arrow. If you look at the conceptualization of 4i arrow, it's basically kind of came out from digitalization. And I'm going to be looking at it in a very something but I want to look at it from the point of view of challenges facing the South African construction industry. Most of them we know, but we need solutions. And from all the speakers this morning, one thing I have been thinking is that, there's so much solution that is there if we are able to actually leverage on these particular technology tools. And I was looking at this document some days ago, the state of the South African construction industry in 2022. When I do presentation, I as an academic, I always try not to be dated. I always want to let people know what is currently happening. And this particular document, though very expensive to purchase, almost about $1,000, and but it gives you a very good and detailed snapshot of what is currently happening in the industry. And one of the issues that they have raised is that the construction industry, the South African construction sector, actually contributes to the GDP about 2.7% of the total GDP. It looks very insignificant, but it's kind of really significant considering the issue of how the GDP is contextualized. However, it was stated that within this particular 2.7, the largest share was actually contributed by construction workers, and looking at the civil engineering sector, followed by residential buildings and non-residential buildings. And the other aspect, which was also mentioned by one of the speakers, is the aspect of the budget of 810 billion rands, which will be spent, which was announced in February, to be spent in the next 3 years. And if you look at the whole issues to say, we're going to spend this money, and considering everything that the CEO of CBE just raised, how are we actually going to spend it? Is it not just going to be one of those things we have seen? It's like the carrot is just dangled. And also, the document also refers to the aspect of rapid implementation is critical, as the industry cannot afford for that delay. And we know that with rapid implementation, we need manpower, we need resources, but at the same time, we need to really ask ourselves the question, where is this money going to be spent? Who is actually going to spend it? And in aspect of looking at the government support when it comes to the construction industry, that the government keep rolling out infrastructure projects, but it is kind of really undermined by maladministration, corruption. It's like we are kind of really used to it at the moment. It's like it has become a phenomenon that it never seems to be going away. Then within the construction industry, there is the aspect that we always talk about: project delays, cost overruns. I was trained as a quantity surveyor. I always tell the students, I don't teach QS anymore, but I always tell them that if you are actually going to get rid of cost overruns, you need to basically retrain the quantity surveyor, because quantity surveyors gives you an estimate, not the actual cost of the project. And they come up with contingency sums. So it's like I'm creating a buffer, basically creating a failure, and I'm trying to create a system on how to manage it. No, this at the end of the day leads to aspect of poor project management and much more. There is the dimension of the substandard workmanship in many cases. This is very obvious. Issues of rework is very big in the construction industry. And also, looking at government support aspects, that there is a massive backlog of social housing. This we have already heard today, and it's estimated that about 20% of the rural-urban households live in informal settlements. You see this phenomenon everywhere. It's like, we need to also think about how do we actually make it to work for us. So I'm going to speak a little bit in depth in terms of the challenges in the South African construction industry, considering that this is the dialogue. It's all about the legacies. We need to kind of diarize issues. Some of the challenges we are facing in South Africa concerning industry, issues of supply chain delays. This is kind of really big. This leads to projects, cost overruns, schedule delays, much more. The other issue that we have always been discussing, the issue of health and safety practices. Why am I talking about challenges? Because I want to kind of come up with some solution to say, there is a solution that is there, and we need to look at digitalization. We don't have to be afraid of it. Then there's the poor procurement environment, which is very, very complicated and very complex. In terms of the construction value chain, you have a lot of subcontractors. Within the subcontracting team, you have other subcontractors. Then the delivery system generally is disjointed with multiple participants. I'm not saying we should reduce it, but I believe that we can actually be able to streamline things to kind of really come up with an optimal way of running the industry. Some more challenges. Some of these ones is not just because of the pandemic. It's always been there. Issues of material shortages. There's been a discussion over time to come up with alternative building materials, because what we talk about depleting the material base and all that, issues of environmental concerns. Then you also look at irregularities within our procurement system. I don't know if the academics here, probably those in the industry, will really suffer from the triple PFA, MFMA, and a whole lot of other policies. There are irregularities and much more. We've heard about this construction mafia and extortion groups kind of really pose a lot of threats within the South African construction industry. Then kind of really bringing it home, slow invoicing and payments, I kind of really consult for an entity and we try to call down on the payment period. You realize some invoices are just slipped in some drawers without really justification why payment should not be made to the contractors. And in some instances, some of them are sent SMSs to say basically send somebody an e-wallet to an unknown number. Then you have inadequate planning. This is kind of really a nightmare where projects are awarded without the presence of a construction site. Or when there is a site, that site is a dolomite site. Inadequate construction planning, and we know that if you don't plan very well, automatically you have actually planned to fail. Then there's the aspect of limited technology adoption. During COVID, the industry was as good as dead. Nothing was actually happening outside, and it was very difficult for you to be classified as a critical aspect of the economy. Then you have this particular issue of the skilled labor shortage. This is really big in the industry. From here, I'm going to look at the disruptors, some things that would disrupt the industry. And I was very excited when I saw the slide from the CEO in terms of the aging workforce. We have done a whole lot of research on the aging workforce, but it never seems to go away. But I believe that digitalization is a solution. Then you talk about the youth unemployment. In terms of, are we really encouraging our youth to work in the industry? Then there's the dimension of globalization. Because we're talking about a whole lot of things to say, is there a hegemony play in terms of why are some things happening in our country, whereas is there an impasse from the global scene? Then climate change, and the major disruptor I'm going to talk about shortly is digitalization, which is the fourth industrial revolution. I see it as fire. That's basically what I see for arrows. It's like fire. If you manage it very well, it will keep you warm, it will keep you away from predator, much more. It was fire that brought all of us here this morning, because if you study the mechanism of the car, they have been able to control fire in a system that actually moves us around. That's basically what 4IRO is all about, or what digitalization of the industry is. What actually is digitalization? I'm going to look at it from three aspects. I look at the word digitization. Okay, actually you convert data from analog to digital. Then you now move from that particular perspective, from digitization, you now move into digitalization, where you now transform those particular data to work for you. So if digitalization is a conversion of data and processes, digitalization is a transformation more than just making existing digital data. You now basically embrace it, looking at its ability to actually kind of really establish and to predict decisions within a particular industry. And here we're looking at the construction industry. Then from digitalization, we now have to start thinking about digital transformation. We need to take advantage of digital processes. We need to create new business concepts, new business ideas that will actually move the industry forward. I believe that the construction industry is one of the least digitalized industry in the world. That's basically what we have seen. I have been working in this industry for over 20 years now. We are very slow to actually kind of implement just little processes that the manufacturing industry really sees as beneficiary. I think that the industry needs to change, and we also need to adapt to change. We should not see change as that particular risk factor that will make us not to do what we want to do. Digitalization, ladies and gentlemen, I believe that it's going to enable the construction industry to actually compress its processes, and it will help significantly to reduce costs, it will reduce delays, and much more risk management. Because there's a lot of things that we put on papers today in terms of construction constraints like risk management. Most of them will automatically be eliminated through digital processes. And with digitalization comes that particular safe mode of construction. Then we're actually able to kind of really achieve efficiency, more collaborative working opportunities, not just with professionals in South Africa, because with platforms like building information modeling, you can actually have architects working for you in other countries. So even though the skills are kind of really leaking out of the country, we can still be able to work with international partners to actually achieve better outcome. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that for us to grow our infrastructure base, we need to really look critically at digitalization. And as I said, I'm using these two words synonymously to say that the fourth industrial revolution is not just about technology, or it's not just about business, it's about society. How society needs to perform at its optimal best. That's basically what the whole revolution is all about. And if you study very carefully the technologies of the 4I arrow, you will realize that technologies like VRO, augmented realities, much more, even the CRISPR technology, because most of the time we think the CRISPR technology is to edit people's genetic makeup, but within the construction dimension, there is now the experimentation with self-healing concrete, where you need bacteria infused with cementitious materials that they're actually able to heal themselves. So you need CRISPR technology in those particular dimensions, not just in the health sector alone. Then you talk about IoT, Prof. Nnamdi talks about blockchain. Within construction, blockchain is a revolution for procurement. Blockchain is a revolution for a whole lot of things. Then you now talk about dimension of nanomaterials. That's for 3D printing to happen, we need innovative material that can actually print, because the current concrete and sludge that we have, or the mortar we have, can't print. So I believe that these technologies, when we actually embrace them, we're able to create new business models, and with new business models, we come up with new value system. Then we're actually able to respond to our infrastructure need, because Africa is really kind of backward when it comes to infrastructure development. And KPMG talks about, and McKinsey says that Africa will need almost about $90 billion per annum for us to actually be able to develop in the next 20 years. Some constraints in terms of why digitalization for the South African construction industry. I look at the word disruption, that the construction industry is ripe for disruption. Because if you look at how performances, how the industry performs, there is no two way around it for us to basically implement this particular thinking of moving into the digital space. So large projects typically takes most of the time, about 20% longer to finish than scheduled. This is a reality. And with that particular 20% schedule overrun, it means that you're going to have almost about 80% over budget. It's not a phenomenon of South Africa. Okay, it's basically common in the whole world. And that's why industries across the world have actually moved into the digital space to solve that problem. Also, the adoption of digitalization practices across the world will also boost economic productivity. It will also give us opportunity to improve and to actually boost our productivity. So projects will be more, at the moment you realize that projects are more complex. So digitalization will help us kind of really solve a whole lot of issues of complexity and issues of skill shortage, as I was saying earlier on. 3 things I'm going to mention before I leave the podium. What actually does it mean? I believe that digitalization means some of the things I have here, that with digitalization, we'll actually be able to kind of increase our productivity. We are also going to be able to improve our document security through blockchain technology and all that. However, I believe that digital transformation in the South African construction industry will require a homegrown solution, not basically just taking what is out there and just kind of plug it in. We need to look at our own solution, because most of the technologies we are talking about in terms of blockchain and all that, we just need to think about homegrown solutions, and it's going to work for us. I said I'm going to talk about 3 things that digitalization will improve the built environment education. You know, having studied quantity surveying, taught quantity surveying, I realized that most of the things that are being taught in our high schools or in our universities, most of them basically, they are not what is needed in the world of work. So we need, for instance, for in-service training, we need our students to go for in-service training. And it's very difficult for a student to access a site. Just going to a site, approach them to say, I'm a student from UG or from any university, can I please just serve here for the next 3 weeks? They will not allow you. We can use virtual realities, augmented realities, where they actually have an immense opportunity to kind of really see how excavation is done. And this opportunity will actually work for them in terms of their training. Then we can create virtual hybrid classrooms, and much more. Considering my background being a quantity surveyor and teaching and all that, I believe that with digitalization, we'll be able to actually kind of really teach good construction technology pedagogy. Because if you understand the technology of anything, you actually be able to replicate it or do anything with it. So we need an education system that will create graduates that are ready for the world of work, and this will happen through digitalization. Secondly, digitalization will help us to achieve safer construction sites. You know, construction kills people's fathers, people's brothers. It's very dangerous. People don't want to go into it. And that's why some of us are kind of really thinking about 3D printing of building. I see an industry in the next 150 years, I always tell my students, where there will be no workers on site, where it will just be machines. So digitalization is going to create safer construction sites where we are able to actually create a digital replica of the sites on the computer, and you're able to monitor in real time. You know, in any form of movement within the tower crane, within the scaffolding, much more, even on the workers, where you're actually able to create wearables that are fitted with sensors, that if a particular worker is not putting on the hard hat very well, it will actually kind of give you a signal. Most of us have wearables in our hands. You don't put most phones don't ring anymore, but you are always aware of what is happening around you. So I believe that through digitalization, we will actually be able to solve the issue of health and safety, because this has been very kind of a situation that we are facing every now and then. And lastly, I believe that digitalization will help us to create new jobs for the construction industry, new skills. Are we going to lose a whole lot of jobs through digitalization? Yes, we're going to lose more jobs. But I believe that we are going to create better, safer, and I call them green jobs will be created, looking into the future. Because, ladies and gentlemen, there are a lot of opportunities when it comes to digitalization, because with the issue of big data, AI, predictive analytics, robotics, people need to operate them, people need to program them. So construction industries must be prepared to invest as much in people as they are also investing in other equipment they are doing. So research has shown that 65% of school children today, from that 1.1 million, we actually work in jobs which do not exist currently. Some of us are actually doing it at the moment. There are some jobs we are doing now, it was not there 60 years ago. So I believe that this, but I'm just looking at just three things, that digitalization for me, ladies and gentlemen, is the game changer for the construction industry. And for us to move to the next level, I believe that as an industry, we need to respond to the opportunities presented by digitalization to create the sustainable delivery of infrastructure in the present and in the years to come. And as I round up, I like using quotes to say that digitalization basically is still at its infancy stage. Most of the country are still experimenting a lot of things, but with a swift pace of change and destruction to the business and society, I believe that the time to join is now. We basically have to kind of really rethink how we do things. And based on what Jaco said, he said that this particular revolution will create more jobs than it destroys, not only in the long term, but also in the short term. You cannot stop the fourth industrial revolution. The only thing we can do is to influence it and make it work for us. That's the only thing we can do. And lastly, as the father of Ohio said, in the new world, it's not the big fish which eats the small ones. It's the fast ones which eat the slow ones. Thank you very much.
There we are. Lots to think about. Thank you. Join me. Yeah. So let's start with one of the things you said earlier on, which is you said digitalization in the construction industry is amongst the slowest or the lowest in the world. Transformation, that is, right? I mean, that's amazing. Why do you think that's the case?
Yeah, you see, when it comes to construction, we are still building with bricks and mortar. I think that particular thing was discovered in the days of the Tower of Babel, based on some of the literatures we read. So construction industry is very slow. There's so much consideration of the workers, the numbers of people working in the industry, what will happen to them. I think there's so much kind of phobia for change within the industry as a whole that it really kind of takes time. If I give an example, Toyota had developed a concept many years ago called the lean concept, how to eliminate waste. It took construction industry another 50 years to start thinking about lean construction in terms of how to reduce waste within the value system. So I think it's more or less about the stakeholders. They need to think differently, think innovatively, knowing fully well that any processes that you kind of really trying to bring into the industry, it will work for productivity, bring better performance, and not to destroy the industry.
And you know, towards the latter part, you said the time to join is now, right? Yep. But then you also said something like for artificial intelligence and other things, or the 4IR, in fact, will engulf you or take over. It's you can't fight it, right?
Yeah.
So if you can't fight it, the point is, you're still saying we should join,
yeah.
but it's not a voluntary act. And I'm just thinking about a tsunami in the positive sense. When that wave comes, like you can't debate whether you're going to wave, you're going to serve that wave or not. You have to find a way how you're going to do it. So what then is the advice then for people in the construction industry about not even opting to join now, but to say, it's here, it's happened. Like, you just have to find innovative ways that you're going to embrace it and keep your staff and keep everybody else happy, and you have to just think completely differently.
Yeah, the aspect of we can't stop it is like the world is a global village. Irrespective of what we think we are not doing now, somebody is going to import it. Somebody is going to bring it in. And sooner or later, it's like the concept of bid information modeling. At the moment, we're working with the CIDB to create bid information modeling diffusion. But we realize that unknowingly, the private sector is already implementing bid information modeling in government jobs. So government personnel send them documents in normal PDF files, they convert it into their own format, and those particular entities are forced to basically imbibe what they're doing. So we can't stop it. We need to basically try to kind of look at how do we carry out a change management process in order to actually phase in the industry gradually, so that it will not significantly distort our current level of creativity. And
you also made the point about whatever the numbers you gave, what was it, 60% of the jobs people are going to walk into today don't exist anymore at the moment, right? So with that in mind, what then is the challenge of the educational institutes? I mean, what are they here? Are they switched on? Do they understand that they, more than anybody else, have to train us for something that doesn't exist? I mean, that's like almost an impossibility, right? But they yet have to do so.
Yeah. As an academic myself, you realize that you kind of fall into a curriculum system that if you are not forward-looking, you will end up kind of really being excited teaching those things. Because I remember when I was teaching quantity surveying, there was a particular concept that, into my understanding, it was taken over by computer input system. But it was still being taught, it was in the curriculum. The accreditation body wanted it to be taught. Some of us have to I'm not going to teach this because it's a waste of my time, it's a waste of the students' time. So you realize that the space within, in terms of the academic institutions, there's an accreditation body. And within the accreditation body, you are given certain leverage to say you can bring in implementations. But most of the time, you realize that innovative thinking is also not allowed. And most of the academics also are not forward-looking, looking at how the industry is currently emerging to actually bring in those processes into what they are doing. So there is that particular kind of, people are just fixated to tick the boxes without actually trying to see how to disrupt the current teaching pattern. So that's why it looks as if the academic institutions are not training graduates for the world of work, but it's more or less, even the academics themselves also need to be forward-looking. They also need training so that they don't end up teaching the same thing.
Yeah, and I mean, therefore, the other one is not even at tertiary level, but obviously at schools, isn't it? Like, what are these school children learning then?
Yeah, you see, I was looking at the curriculum of the private schools within South Africa and the government school. It's so different. You realize that within the private school, there's robotics, there's coding. On the other side, none of that. Even the kids I'm not sure some of them have ever seen a computer really work on it before. So I think it's more or less a deliberate agenda that we as a nation, through the basic education department, higher education, needs to work together, because if we don't start from the very lowest level, bringing the kids up, it becomes kind of really difficult. And also, I think the teacher cohort within the system also need a little bit of unlearning.
A little bit of learning is most
unlearn, kind of really relearn. And also, I think there should be opportunities for people to actually go out to see what is happening out there and know that these things can be implemented here without any fear.
Yeah, I think it's an important point. I mean, I'm just thinking about it. If there was a period none of us could use mobile phones, we didn't know how, but we learned it somewhere or the other. So the same point, if the teachers are not switched on, certainly at primary school level, then how are the learners going to be switched on? It's a big challenge, which gets me thinking then about, even in the broad scheme of digitalization, is the South African digitalization similar or very different to what happens in other parts of the world? And I can tell you now, I hate using the phrases USA and UK as if they're the only two places in the world. I'm not going to say that, okay? Because there are many other parts around the world, including Asia, etc. So, but in other parts of the world that are racing ahead with digitalization, how different is the level of study here versus there?
I think what we're doing at the moment is just to implement what they're already doing. It's like, we know that one size doesn't really fit when it comes to this process. That was why I said we need a homegrown approach. At the moment, considering that we work in this space, what we're doing is to look at the best practices that have been implemented. For instance, in the UK kind of really helped with the building information modeling, which other economies have actually imbibed also, to look at how should it work for South Africa? How should it work for the South African construction industry? That is not really different, but we need to really kind of adapt it systematically, because I think our dynamics in terms of how our industry is structured is different from every other economy. I think one country that I kind of really follow in terms of how they implement change in their economy is Malaysia. You look at Malaysia, look at what others are doing, but they look at the local content and infuse it into it, and then they're able to develop. So at the moment, I would say what we're doing is not different from what others are doing, but we don't have to just take what they're doing and plug it in here. We need to look at a nuanced approach to actually develop systematically, and that will give us a unique identity, because with South Africa, we actually have the opportunity of pushing into other African areas. You know, there's that frontier to move into African country, because South Africa is the leader in most of these things. Most of the things we're talking about this morning, most of the African countries are not even thinking about it. That when we are actually able to grow it and kind of customize it, it's basically going to work very well for the entire 1.4 billion people.
That's what happens. Here's the last thing, and it zeroes in again on people in the construction industry. Is the slow rate of transformation of digitalization in the construction industry costing them money?
I think at the moment we're doing a study to actually check in terms of how the level of investment and the levels of return. Definitely from the very kind of face value, what you hear is that it's more expensive. But at the long run, you will realize that you would have solved a lot of problems, that you will actually end up saving yourself a whole lot of crisis, and you actually make more profit out of digitalization as against not going into it.
And that's a message to every one of you. Yeah, let's leave it at that. Thank you so much. But you can stick around further, because what we're going to do now for about 10 minutes or so, people are itching to ask questions, right? If we were totally digital, we'd say tweet the questions, but no, you can do it here. So if I can get all the speakers up here for about 10 minutes or so maximum, and we've got, I think, 2 runners who will get the mics to you guys. So if you want to ask questions, just raise your hands. In fact, let's do this. Let's because we've probably got time for 5, I think, at most, okay? And to help with the cause, please ask questions, and there's no time for an actual speech, because there just will not be, right? So who wants to ask questions? Just raise your hand so I can get you. So, okay, that's number 1, right? Let me just see. That's number 2. I'll take 5. So I've got 2 there. If we take less, that means we can have lunch earlier. I'm just saying, right? 1, 2. Is it only 2? All right. If you want to, so I've got 1, 2, 3 now, right? Okay. If there's 2 more, we'll see. Right. Let's get the mic to number 1, which is over there, right? Can we get it up here, up front here, please? And maybe the mic to number 2, if you've got a spare mic as well. Okay, number 2, maybe we'll get to you as well, because you're next to him, right? So the number 2 becomes number 3, then we'll get to you, and we'll just pass it on there, right? Okay, you guys are all next to each other. That helps. Okay, got that. All right, okay, do you want to go first then? We'll give it a chance, go ahead.
No
right.
problem.
Just tell us who you're addressing it to, then we can get an answer. Thank you.
Right. My name is Musa Shangase. I'm Director at Corabric, and I'm also the President of Master Builders Association in South Africa. I've got 1 question on carbon emission or carbon footprint. I think it should be directed to NJOMBO and his team. And just 2 comments that you spoke about on Business Forum as a mouthpiece of the construction industry in South Africa. I hate to blame the government and Dimban on everything that is happening. I'm referring to Mr. MYEZA now. However, on the Business Forum, I put all the blame into government. In 2002, a piece of legislation called the Preferential Procurement Framework, Act number 5 of 2000, was promulgated, and the problem is that it was not communicated to the private sector and to the civil society, and any clever people would have picked up, and that's the reason why we have business forums, because they saw an opportunity and they went for it. all government projects come with a social compact to say 30% of material that is going to be utilized in a project is going to come from local community, 30% of materials and 30% of labor. But it was never communicated. Out of 186 projects in 2021, which amounts to 63 billion rands, were affected by the disruption of the business forums. Tick that box. Program Director, you mentioned that the South African construction industry delivered the 2010 projects, on time. But Sanral thinks that we cannot deliver a road infrastructure between KZN and Eastern Cape. And I'm not blaming government, I'm just saying. The last question. The last question is based on carbon footprint or emission, Njombo. Just explain it to me as a lay person. How does carbon emission being measured, especially using the concept of cradle to grave? If using, I'll use PPC, you're quarrying and you produce, is it from the quarry to the gate, or is it from quarry to the end user? Considering that you transport clinker to the blending plant and you transport pockets and bulk into the end user. Thank you.
Okay, got that. Right, so if we can, all right, maybe just answer that quickly because we have to wrap up like in 5 minutes or so in total. So I'm not too sure who needs to answer this here. Whoever feels, okay, go ahead, thank you.
So in terms of the boundary, it's quarry to the gate. And that's what I referred to as we've defined our target in terms of scope 1 and scope 2 within the ambit of our control. We are evaluating the option of moving towards scope 3, which will talk to getting that product to the customer, and also the impact of bringing in certain raw materials, additives, etc., etc. So all our controls and measurements are within our footprint, let's call it that, within our boundaries.
Okay, hopefully that will answer that. Right. Okay, number 2, I would suggest there's an opportunity over lunch for, if I were you, I would sit right next to them during lunch. I would definitely do that, right? So, yeah.
Thank you so much. My name is Sandile Mhlungu. I'm a student, I'm a master's student here at the faculty. So I actually want to point my questions to Mr. Njoko, Mr. Namati, and sorry, I just need to just check. Mr. MSIZI. So the first question is around the aspects of the alternative building technology. I know everybody's speaking about 3D printing, but what I understand, 3D printing compared to you building from brick and mortar is about 70% more expensive. So what would be the aspects that one could look at in terms of could 3D printing link up with blockchain to sort of having a costing effect, looking at prescriptive analysis to have a cheaper costing effect of actually 3D printing in that aspect. And then also looking at, Mr. MSIZI, the aspect of what happened in Durban with the flooding. I saw some imagery that was online where I saw government, I'm not saying you government, but I saw government in the aspects of now creating social housing or emergency social housing for those particular people, where they use drywalling. So the drywalling, obviously, when you looked at the detail of this particular structure, it didn't have a fascia, it just had IBR sheeting, not even IBR, it had corrugated sheeting, it had drywalling. But in the cracks, it would be as if someone is sleeping on the outside, There's holes within the aspects of the detail of the actual roof where a fascia board would need to be there. What are the aspects of those alternatives being looked at? Could it be 3D printing where now you could do costing for that instead of using drywalling? Because I think the aspects of just brick and mortar and drywalling needs to obviously shift. And then the last question for you, Mr. MSIZI, would be, you talked about the candidacy for people leaving. So for me, I'm someone also who studied architecture, where I've registered as a candidate architectural technologist. And in that aspect, you shift basically from internship to internship to internship. There's a level that you don't reach pertaining to the numbers that you spoke to about, where you looked at someone that is at 45 and above, that will be at a level where someone that is between 25 and 35, that they would need to obviously shift it to that focus. It also then deals with the aspect where last year, I think there was a presentation for the CIDB where I forgot his name, where he mentioned that even at the CIDB level, when you applying for tender, there's a certain level that the people look at. If you're level 1 or level 2, you are sidelined. But then if you're level above that, you obviously are more picked at in that aspect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so let's see. I mean, we need to move on with time. Let's see whoever's relevant. I mean, you clearly are, right? And whoever needs to answer that, go ahead, yeah.
Okay. Look, I think the first question is relevant, but I think the context matters. I'm not justifying the structures in Devon. There was a disaster. And I think we should have handled it better. I mean, I was at the session yesterday with the Minister of Human Settlement and the team. One of the issues that we discussed was the very same issue, that some people are still staying in halls, even today. And then I think surely such disasters will continue to happen in the future, and I think some of the alternative technologies that we are coming up with should be deployed in such instances, because you can't predict what will happen again and when such event happens. So I think the point is well made, because it's about human beings that will be staying there. I mean, one of the issues that we are grappling with currently, people are staying in halls. It's inhumane. I mean, you can't stay in a hall for a whole year with your whole family, different families staying in this. It's just not palatable. But I think it's a point well made. The second issue around the candidacy, it's a big problem that we have. And young people are discouraged. I mean, I was in Mpumalanga, wherein you find young people have been to EXA assessment program 3 times. They failed. And they failed not because they're not ready, but they're not exposed to other components that enables them to become PRs. And then what they do, they just stop coming for the PR. So these numbers are not, they're understated. So we're aware of that. And I think that's why then collectively in the built environment family now, we are developing what we call a national logbook, which will be able to track someone from entry until the end. Because then we can tell if you work in a particular area in Palabora, how many programs have you done? Do you have a mentor? Are you ready to go for your board exam or assessment? Can we help you with the report? And when you go there, at least we guarantee that you're going to exit. So it's really a deliberate way of pushing candidates out of this system where they are sitting. About 35,000 young people sitting in a candidate space. It's not acceptable, especially in a country like ours where we've got a skills shortage. So I think that's an intervention that we are making. We'll be rolling it out. So it will become compulsory for companies or even entities to say, when you have candidates, register them. But I think importantly, one of the lessons we're taking from the Western Cape colleagues is that when they issue a tender, it is compulsory for you to have a certain percentage for candidates and then link them up with the mentors. Because if you don't have a mentor, you're not going to be ready to go through the process. Right. And it's very rigorous. So I think those are some of the lessons that we are having. But it will be rolled out in the next financial year or so.
Okay, thank you. NJOMBO, you wanted to say something, yeah?
Yeah, no, it's just the answer around alternative building technology. And yes, 3D might be expensive for now, but I think people in this room, the industry itself needs to, if you import technology, you're gonna pay more. So the question is, what is the industry doing together with academics to see how we can make that technology affordable? But there's also other alternatives. When we talk about alternative building technology, there is preform, which is quick. So ABTs for South Africa or for Africa, it's more about time and how quickly we can be able to implement. And preform is another way of alternative building technology. At least I'm close to retirement, so ABM, ABM will be taking people like ourselves out of business if we don't innovate alternative building materials, which is the next step. And it's just embracing that, and the industry saying, how do we replace this with something that is sustainable?
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Right, let's get to the last one. Right, go ahead.
Okay. Good day, everyone. I'm Sizwe Mbata. I'm a master's student here at UJ. My question would really be on my far right. My professor there, Mr. Mrs. there.
Professor.
No. I mean,
when you said far right, I thought he was referring to your political affiliation. But anyway,
no, I met my Professor Clinton and maybe I'm concerned. I don't want to lie. My colleague here just maybe touched on some of the aspects of the candidacy. I've been trying to register as a candidate, quantity surveyor for some time now. With the high rates of unemployment and all that stuff, you cannot really register as a candidate because now there should be someone to monitor your progress, so that you can maybe write your board exam later on. But now, it's been, let me say it's my 5th year now, trying to get to the industry, trying also to get someone to be appointed as a mentor for me. Unfortunately, I've been moving from one company to the next, trying to get that. Because now, they also said, nah, just work. We'll see that later. But now, that doesn't really feed to what I want to become later. Because I want to register as a professional. I want to, whatever that I've sacrificed, the years, and the money from sponsors, for me, for my education, at the end of the day, it has to factor into something that is, I'll say, is concrete. But now it's just going to go in vain. Like, what am I doing? Okay, I don't want to say this, but who's the youngest here? Maybe I'm the youngest, I don't know. Most of
I'm young at heart.
but now, the fear is, okay, you guys just elaborated that the professionals that are currently in the industry, whichever industry, are aging. What about us? I'm practicing in the industry, but now I cannot sign no way where it's say, okay, I'm a professional now. You guys are aging. What's going to happen? No, it's fact. It's fact. I've been to the council in Midrand. They know me. Like, they know whenever I come, they're like, okay, stop that guy. Because I've caused a serious havoc. Because now I try to understand on how come someone who's, let's say, for instance, someone made an example of a nurse who would just be registered as maybe construction or whatever, construction company, then they will operate in the construction industry. But I cannot go and open a medical practice because I'll be required a PR number. I think with the accountancy department, they actually assign mentors for their students so that they can practice. Okay, with law, you're required to go for your articles and all the stuff. There is a structure to assess those students in order to get them from that point into the point of professionalism. But with us, we are the drivers of everything, engineering in the built environment. We are the drivers of everything. We are under this structure because of what? The engineering in the built environment. But now, if we forsake that discipline, or I would say, I don't know which way to use, but whichever way, if we were to forsake that, even the 4th Industrial Revolution, I don't want to talk about the curriculum, maybe starting from primary, high school until university. If we now, like us now, we follow new guys. If we don't know what to, because for instance, you guys know what to say to us, but what are we going to say to the generation coming after us?
Can we do this now? I mean, unless, because I want to suggest to you, if I were you, I would definitely do that during the break now. Have a one-on-one chat. I would strongly suggest that, right? That's one. But if there's one, and you've said a lot, but I think it's important what you've articulated. Because, you know, when we say, I'm not in the industry, when I say I feel for you, I don't feel anything. I don't even know. No, what I'm trying to say is, you need to hear what I'm saying. There's a lack of empathy in the entire country about the struggles that people like you have. So we need to hear that, otherwise we don't know that. So it is important, that's why I've indulged it, right? But we do need to stop So what I'm going to ask you, is there a specific last question you want to ask? Then I'm going to suggest when we wrap up that you actually have that conversation, because it's really important. Because the truth is, I do feel for you. It's important. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. Okay, I just took my frustration out of you guys. But, sorry about that. But now, is there a way that we can merge, I would say, the academia, professor, and as well as government? If I'm saying government, well, there's only guys from PPC here. But now, if I'm saying from government, I'm factoring the private sector as well. Is there a way we can factor our education, the academia, with the industries?
Okay. Can we do that? Thank you. Right? Yeah?
That is why I'm here. And I think that's a partnership that I spoke about, which is very important. I can only churn out numbers from the council because that's what I see. But I have to speak to Prof. Clinton, that Prof. Clinton, in the past, when you finish your first year, universities used to have a list of companies that are looking for in-service training students. It doesn't happen nowadays. And when students finish, where do they go to? They go to PNET. So what we're arguing from as Council for the Built Environment is that at least when students finish, register with the Council for the Built Environment. At least we know where you are. And currently we lose colleagues because they disappear from the system. And I think the support that you're talking about, it is a reality. And we've been doing this pilot project at a small scale. You go to ESCOM, they run it differently. You go to Transnet, they've got a different model. And you go to different provinces, they do it differently. And I think where we're coming in is that there must be consistency, predictability, and transparency on how people like yourself get absorbed into the industry. It cannot be that if you're a town planner, the moment you graduate, you can register with the council as a candidate. In EXA, you need to have a job. So those inconsistencies in terms of how council treat young people, I think that's what we as the council must actually address together, my colleagues.
Absolutely.
But I think we'll have a chat post
Perfect.
this. And
okay,
let's see
you
how
want, do you want to add to that too? Go ahead, yeah?
Okay, I think I just wanted to say that the point that has been raised is one of the major reasons for the legacies, Diaries, where we actually have these conversations. And at the moment, we are working with the National Department of Public Works. And in the month of, I think 2 months ago, we launched they call it the student chapter for the built environment, which we are working closely with them from UJ, is actually to create a hub, which the CEO is talking about, where anyone that graduated or you are currently studying a BE program, you actually register on that particular system. Either you have a mentor or not. We're actually working with them to actually allocate mentors to people that basically want to kind of, either they are working in the industry or they need assistance. We're really working with them very closely, and I hope that will materialize. We've had a couple of meetings. Dr. Lipazi, my colleague here, is kind of really on it to make sure that it's not just registration for registration's sake. We're really monitoring them to look at how many people have registered, and the system is unique to say, even though you don't have a mentor, if you kind of recommend somebody, the person gets an email, but it goes back to the Department of Public Works and us to actually be able to source that person for you. So I think these particular issues have been recognized, and the stakeholders are handling it, and they're actually coming to universities to get this kind of really sorted. So apart from you, we also have other guys that kind of really complaining about the same thing. So we really want to work with them so that from university, students actually have mentors that can actually work with them towards registration. Thanks.
And planning it up front makes absolute sense. Thank you. Please have a conversation. I think it needs to. Can we leave it at that, everybody? Thank you very much. Time is against us. I'd love to have chatted much longer. For those who now wanting to talk, I'm going to suggest that you maybe just have a chat when we're done. I'm sorry, we're just running out of time here, right? Thanks, everybody. Right? Let me just wrap up then by saying, in fact, there's 2 votes of thanks coming up before we get to lunch, right? So for that reason, I would think the votes of thanks will be short because there's lunch coming up, right? The first would be from, if I can call up Dr. Morendeni Lipazi from UJ, right? Yeah. Oh, there we are. Perfect. And then Anthea Windvogel will join from PPC. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all our speakers that presented here. So I'm from the Sustainable Human Settlements Construction Research Center within the University of Johannesburg. So it has been a privilege as the center and the university to have been hosting this Legacy Diaries with us here. And most importantly, as the center and the university, we commit to being your academic implementers, partners, and bloggers, communicators of choice. And then as we commit towards making sure that we combat unemployment through continuous training and research, that has a lasting impact within the country as a whole. And this will be done while we harness 4IR and digital opportunities as we look at the sustainable development goals that are there. And as a center, however, we'll also look into ensuring that we do all this as ethical as possible and while being accountable leaders. So where we are now, we are within a campus where is the the School of Tourism and Hospitality within the 4 main campuses of the university. We also thank them for being able to host us here. Also PPC, those on the background in terms of organizing with us as the center as well. I would also like to thank you very much. And then I think the challenge that I'm putting forward to these Legacy Diaries is to ensure that with each passing session, we bring progressive feedback based on the last one. And then I think that way we'll be ensuring that we help and solve challenges and social economic challenges of the country. So thank you very much, enjoy, and you can also take a walk around the university as well to see other opportunities that are there for your other future functions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right, thanks for that. Let's get Anthea. Where is she? There we are. Anthea from PPC. Everybody knows you, right? I think so.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks, ASHRAF. So ASHRAF, there are women in the built environment, as you can see today. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for your time. Let me start by saying I'm part of the strategic marketing team at PPC, and it's been an absolute honor having each of you here today. Thank you for giving us your time this morning and choosing to spend the morning with us. To our customers, our industry colleagues, the media, the academics here today, you as our valued partners, we thank you as PPC for choosing us, but more importantly, for continuously choosing the PPC brand. To the Executive Dean, the team here at UJ, thank you for hosting us, and thank you for the work that has been done in developing this inspiring platform. To our speakers, to our host ASHRAF, thank you for what you have shared here today. And if there's one thing that I've taken with me today, is that it is clear that our industry, in order for it to leverage the new world and to be sustainable, we need to leverage technology and we need to leverage the youth. To PPC team, to our MD, the sponsor of this great event, PPC Mancom, those present and those in absentia, our partners and our suppliers, this would not be possible without you. A special mention to my team Andile and Sia. Thank you very much for the work in the background. As 2022 folds, ladies and gentlemen, I wish you all a blessed festive season and a concrete 2023 as you take time off to spend lasting memories with your family. Thank you again for your continued time and support, and please do join us for lunch. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so almost done. Just a couple of things before we wrap up. One, those hashtags are still important because you can amplify the pictures you've taken and your comments even long beyond this on all social media platforms. So Legacy Diaries and the other one, PPC Unshakable. And talking about it, I did ask you guys earlier on to tweet and to Instagram and whatever else you want to do. Some people did, some people don't. But in particular, Lindiwe, Tembekile, where's Lindiwe? There we are. And then the other person, Cornelia Asante. Where's Cornelia? Unless she's doing it online. Anyway, the conversations were most enlightening. That's taken place between the two of you guys. So I've been eavesdropping into that. I would suggest people look into that, right? From my side, great privilege to be here. But I think the lessons are obvious. I mean, I'm just thinking about it myself. Anthea, in terms of what we said, I'm really going to try at events where I'm program director, MC, or even a keynote speaker, that besides what I contract to say, can you reserve one table for young people, and I'm going to push it out through my own Champion South Africa project to get, that's like everywhere, not once, everywhere. So hopefully when I come to you, you're going to say yes. Because, I mean, the truth is, I mean, it's absolutely spot on. In every other sector of society, we want the young people, we want the lighties, and we admire them. Like, look at them, look at how great they are. And we're lagging behind politically, we know that, right, in terms of how many young people. But as a country, it is not in our interest, even if we are selfish, to actually have a very aged leadership. There's no way it can be in our interest, and we know that. It's pretty obvious, right? So as we get to lunch, I think the concept of this very first Thought Leader series, the Built Legacy Diaries, I think has been excellent, and I'd like to get all of us to just thank the organizers who were involved in it, but not like, again, the Spaza thing. I mean, let's make some noise here. It's been really good. And I know the plan is like hopefully to spread it around the country every quarterly or whatever, or I hope it happens because I think it's important, and then to get the young people to really talk, so we should need to do that. So just from my side, as we get to lunch, I think take the opportunity of talking to people. You need to do that. It's more important than the lunch. It's the brain food that you require. And from just where I sit at Champion South Africa, because I'm going back to what Anthea said at the end, as we get to 2023, I so desperately want this country to become this champion nation. We're a mid-table nation messing around and going to get relegated if we don't buck up. I want that. For that to happen, we need people to become champion people. What we try to do is can we build people into the champion people needed to build a champion nation? Why does that matter? Because from all the things I told you guys before, you guys are in a privileged position. You already have a seat at the front table. So how are we going to inspire 60 million people to become champions in their spaces, to champion great causes, so that we can become this champion nation, not just in the building industry? And finally, as we get to lunch, it was very intentional for me to get the speakers to be introduced, not just by their titles, but what's your personal purpose? What's your champion? What's your national purpose? What should it be? So as you reflect on it during lunch, I want you to think about it. What's your personal purpose? What do you think the national purpose should be? And then very importantly, how do you link your personal purpose to the national purpose? And the organizations that you represent, are they aligned to your personal purpose, to the organizational purpose and the national purpose? Let's see what comes out of it. And feel free to engage with me over lunch at any other time, okay? Because until we don't think together for something far bigger than we really are right now, well, we're just going to sit around in mid-table mediocrity, and that's not acceptable. Going back to the PPC point about, hashtag PPC unbreakable. Let us be that unbreakable nation that we really want to aspire to. Thank you very much.